What if Master Yoda had bad relations with the Wookiees? What would happen then? So we pick up the story right after Anakin has been denied the rank of Master. Let's begin. After Anakin successfully suppressed the urge to rip off a council seat and throw it at Master Windu, the Chosen One took a seat, following which, the council chamber settled into an awkward silence. It was Master Ki-Adi-Mundi who finally broke the tension. "What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?" he inquired, tilting his elongated head thoughtfully. Silence descended once more, growing heavier with each passing second. No one wanted to respond. They all knew where this would lead. If anyone spoke up, they might end up on a mission to Kashyyyk, a planet infested with giant spiders and other vile creatures. Some considered the Wookiee homeworld hell itself, but those who knew better saw it as the place hell condemned the souls it couldn't break. Mundi spoke up confidently because he knew he wouldn't have to go there. He was already assigned to Megiddo. The quiet persisted as Mundi scanned the chamber, daring someone to answer. He had anticipated this reaction from the council. He didn't need the Force to foresee it. And Mundi, of course, already had a plan in place to deal with this. His gaze settled on Yoda, who appeared deep in meditation, a convenient way to avoid the conversation. "Master Yoda? Master?" Mundi called out, feigning innocence. Yoda remained motionless, pretending not to hear. But Mace Windu, ever helpful, gave him a gentle nudge, shaking his shoulder to rouse him from his meditation. Reluctantly, Yoda opened his eyes, suppressing a flicker of annoyance. He glanced up at Mundi, briefly considering pretending he was still asleep. "Master Yoda, would you be willing to go to Kashyyyk?" Mundi asked, with a diplomatic smile that barely concealed his smugness. Yoda nearly blurted out that the droids wouldn't need his help destroying Kashyyyk before he remembered that, somehow, the planet was an ally. He searched his mind for a good excuse to avoid a visit to that Force's mistake of a planet. But before his ancient mind could formulate an appropriate excuse, Mundi continued with the following. "I have already informed the media of your imminent departure to Kashyyyk. The news will hit the holofeeds in a few hours." Yoda glared daggers at Mundi, his face a calm mask, but inside he was cursing and screaming. That bald-headed Griffin Slimo had him cornered. If Yoda backed out now, it would make him look weak to the entire galaxy, and Yoda's carefully crafted reputation as a wise and valiant Jedi Master was far too valuable to sacrifice. Mundi had played him, a betrayal most foul, one that forced the Grand Master to do his job. And now the rest of the council seized the opportunity to push Yoda into accepting. They began murmuring their agreement, praising Yoda for his bravery. Mentally, they all thanked Mundi for sparing them from this unpleasant task. Shakti, Obi-Wan, and Mace immediately took out their datapads, posting about the great Master Yoda's journey to Kashyyyk. Holofeed posts featuring images of Yoda began to spread. Obi-Wan even showed Yoda his holofeed, where Obi-Wan's post was already garnering billions of interactions, most praising Yoda's courage, some arguing over his decisions, others insulting each other's mothers in the replies, and a few sharing links to what they claimed were totally legit investment opportunities. Yoda's ears drooped slightly, a rare sign of his irritation as he realized that all his fellow council members, except Anakin, who sat brooding over his own problems, had publicly announced his mission to Kashyyyk. Finally, Yoda sighed and spoke in his raspy voice. "Bad relations with the Wookiees, I have, but go I will in 2 days' time." The council members agreed that 2 days was more than reasonable. And then Yoda himself posted about the upcoming trip to his billions of followers on the holofeed, accompanied by an image of him standing stoically. After that, Yoda settled back into his seat, his expression mirroring the pained look Anakin had earlier, both victims of bureaucracy and Jedi peer pressure. But Yoda wasn't about to concede defeat. As he sat there, an idea began to form, a plan that just might work. But he'd need help. Fortunately, Yoda knew just how to get a certain someone on the council to lend a hand. Not a difficult task, as this person only had one real hand left, as the other had been taken by Count Dooku, who could not count. As the council meeting concluded, Yoda watched from the shadows as Obi-Wan approached Anakin, assigning him the mission to spy on the Chancellor. And after Obi-Wan departed, Yoda seized his opportunity. Quietly, he approached the brooding young Jedi. "Skywalker, may I have a word?" Yoda asked. Anakin glanced down at the diminutive figure before him, irritation still simmering from Obi-Wan's earlier words. "Master Yoda," he greeted flatly. "I suppose you want to talk about the Chancellor? Obi-Wan already briefed me on the secret mission." His tone carried a sharp edge, making it clear he wasn't in the mood for more council interference. Yoda shook his head. "No, not the Chancellor, Skywalker. Matters of true importance I have." He glanced around the vast hallway they were standing in, ensuring they were alone. His eyes, alert and focused, met Anakin's again. But not here. Discuss this in my quarters we must, Yoda said. His cane tapped softly as he turned, signaling Anakin to follow. Anakin sighed but complied, his curiosity piqued by Yoda's unusual discretion. They navigated the winding halls of the Jedi Temple until they reached Yoda's quarters, a small, humble space, fitting for the ancient master who had resided there for centuries. The walls were lined with shelves holding old artifacts, books, and various trinkets, each carrying a story from Yoda's long past, including an inhaler that seemed out of place among the other relics. The scent of aged parchment and certain herbs lingered in the air, a comforting presence amidst the usual sterility of the temple. Yoda moved with surprising grace, settling onto a cushion and gesturing for Anakin to sit across from him. Anakin sat, a hint of impatience evident as Yoda regarded him thoughtfully. "So, what's this really about, Master Yoda?" Anakin asked, frustration still tinging his voice. Yoda folded his hands over his cane, his eyes turning to Anakin with a sluggish, hazy focus. There was an intensity in that gaze, but also something Anakin hadn't seen often in Yoda. Sympathy, or so it seemed. "Master, a rank you deserve it is, Anakin," Yoda said, a slow smile creeping up. "Wrongly denied it has been. Foolish the council is," Yoda then added. Anakin's eyes widened in surprise, his heartbeat quickening as Yoda's words sank in. For a moment he almost forgot the sting of being asked to spy on the Chancellor. Hope blossomed within him. The rank of Master meant access to the restricted Jedi archives, where he believed a way to save Padme might be found. "Master, you truly believe that?" Anakin managed to say. Yoda nodded, and then said the following after pausing to let out a cough. "Yes, and I will help you gain this rank." He allowed Anakin to bask in the warmth of those words, the young Jedi's eyes shining with renewed hope. But then Yoda's smile faded, his expression growing serious once more. "But a task you must complete first, Skywalker. To earn the rank of Master, you must assist me." Anakin blinked, his face falling slightly as he sensed the gravity in Yoda's tone. "A task?" he repeated, genuinely confused, the elation from moments before beginning to dissipate. Yoda leaned in, his voice lowering. "To earn this title, help me on Kashyyyk you must, young Skywalker." The mention of Kashyyyk made Anakin's stomach churn. He frowned, a storm brewing behind his eyes. "Kashyyyk?" he repeated, like he couldn't believe his ears. He had seen hollows of that miserable planet. It was covered in twisted, towering trees and oppressive canopies that swallowed light whole. Giant arachnids and grotesque centipedes lurked in every shadow of that world, crawling over each other in relentless swarms. If a god had crafted the galaxy and entrusted it to his children to shape, then Kashyyyk would be the twisted creation of the neglected child, the one desperate for attention, whose creator sensed the inherent wrongness in the child from birth. While the other children created out of joy, this one craved praise, driven by selfish motives. And when its beauty went unseen, the child filled its fiefdom with abominations, hoping that if wonder failed, terror might finally force the creator to look its way. This was Kashyyyk, and now Yoda was proposing that Anakin accompany him there. Anakin's mind wandered further. He recalled being at Padme's apartment one evening when a spider, no bigger than his palm, but with legs that seemed to stretch for miles, appeared on the wall. Anakin didn't want to go near it, or touch it, even with the unseen hand of the Force. He was repulsed by the creature. Repulsed, not scared or anything, of course. Definitely not that. I mean, he was a general in the Grand Army of the Republic, the Chosen One, a warrior of unimaginable power. Him being afraid of a spider? Ridiculous. No, it wasn't fear. It was about the sanctity of life. That's what kept him away from the insignificant creature. He was feeling compassionate that day, attuned to the living force, so taking even the life of a small creature seemed improper. That was it. It had nothing to do with its hairy legs or the way it seemed to stare into his soul with those beady eyes. "Padme," he had called out, his hand resting on his lightsaber just in case the spider jumped at him. Padme appeared from the other room, her eyes narrowing as she saw her husband, the hero of the Clone Wars, standing rigid, staring at the wall as if trying to bore a hole through it. "Anakin, what is it?" she asked. Anakin turned to her, hoping his expression conveyed serene wisdom, though it was closer to mild panic. He gestured to the spider and said, "Padme, do you think you could call Jar Jar? Perhaps he could, I don't know, eat it, or something?" Padme's eyebrow lifted in disbelief. "Anakin, I highly doubt Jar Jar eats spiders. The last time one got into his office, he panicked so badly he threw himself out a window, landed on a building 100 levels down." Hearing this, Anakin turned slightly away from the spider, momentarily distracted. "He really survived a drop that big?" he asked, incredulous. Padme rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. Yes, and it made me late for a meeting. The whole building was talking about it for days. Anakin shook his head slowly, marveling. Jar Jar does have a habit of getting out of whatever dangerous situation he's in. His voice trailed off as a strange, unsettling thought flickered in the back of his mind, like a whisper of suspicion. But he pushed it aside, snapping back to the problem at hand as he refocused on the spider. Padme raised an eyebrow, clearly growing impatient. So, Anakin, will you be handling this spider anytime soon? I need to get to the executive building. Anakin groaned, still eyeing the spider like it was a miniature Sith Lord. Can you squash it, Padme? You don't have to be a Jedi to do that. Padme sighed. Anakin raised his chin, affecting a look of serene wisdom. The Force told me not to, Padme. It has to be you, he explained. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on his precious copy of the Jedi Path. Without a second thought, he picked it up and held it out to her. Padme took the book, looked at it, and said, Wait, isn't this the book passed down through your whole Jedi lineage? Anakin just shrugged, unfazed. She sighed, glancing up at the spider. Anakin, it's too high up and I'm already late. Anakin looked at her for a second, blinking, before lifting her by the knees with a blank expression, raising her up until she was right in front of the spider. Anakin! Padme yelped, wobbling slightly. Don't drop me! You feel off balance. Padme, I can best Master Yoda in a duel. If we ever fought. I'm pretty sure I can hold someone up without falling over. Now destroy that spider, Padme. The Force demands it. Alright, Anakin. Just give me a second, Padme replied. With one swift motion, she brought Anakin's book down on the arachnid, crushing it against the wall. The spider's limp form fell to the floor, and as fate would have it, landed on Anakin's knee with a soft, gross plop. Anakin's reaction was immediate. He yelped, dropping Padme unceremoniously. He quickly called upon the Force, his hand outstretched in a dramatic flourish as he summoned a metal art piece from across the room. The piece hurtled through the air and, with a crunch, obliterated the dead spider. Only then did Anakin seem to calm down, taking a deep breath. Not because he was scared or anything, of course. He then turned around to see Padme sprawled on her back, groaning in pain, her eyes wide with disbelief as she glared at him. Later, when Padme was taken to the hospital, Anakin learned she had almost fractured her spine. She was ultimately fine, but Anakin ended up sleeping in the Jedi Temple for the next 2 weeks. During this time, he could often be heard muttering, "You turned her against me," while glaring at some unseen phantom, presumably the spider's spirit. Skywalker? Skywalker? Lost in thought, are you? Yoda's voice cut into Anakin's flashback. Anakin blinked, snapping back to reality. Sorry, Master Yoda, I was seeking guidance from the Force, he said, trying to collect himself. What were we discussing again? Yoda's ears twitched, and he gave Anakin an exasperated look. A mission to Kashyyyk, Skywalker, Yoda repeated, then quickly added the following before Anakin could protest. But not to assist the Wookiees, Skywalker. A much shorter mission this will be. No need to even land on Kashyyyk. Anakin tilted his head, a mix of confusion and hope in his eyes. What's this small mission, Master? Anakin asked. Yoda leaned in, his voice lowering again as if to shield his cunning plan from the universe itself. Thought of a better way I have to deal with the conflict on Kashyyyk. One that won't require you, me, or any other Jedi to set foot on that cursed rock forgotten by the Wills, Yoda replied. Anakin's curiosity intensified, hope gleaming in his eyes like a pair of particularly shiny droid optics. Go on, he said, his impatience momentarily forgotten. Weapons exist, Skywalker, that if used in the Clone Wars or any wars truly, would constitute severe crimes. Forbidden weapons, outlawed by the Republic, and all those in civilized space, these are. One such manner of weaponry, advanced bioweapons are, Yoda finished. Anakin raised a closed fist to his mouth. Bioweapons, he repeated, clearly intrigued. Are you saying the Separatists have one? Yoda shook his head, his ears flopping slightly with the movement. No such weapon do the Separatists possess. But he paused, letting the tension build, savoring the look on Anakin's face. The young Jedi was hanging on every word now, leaning forward, ready for the grand reveal. But what is it, Master? Anakin prompted, his impatience bubbling once more. But something exists deep within our hidden archives, Yoda said, a sly grin forming on his wrinkled face. Something that could qualify as such a weapon. Anakin stayed focused as Yoda continued, the small Jedi Master's voice dipping into an almost ominous tone. A substance it is. Goo, if you will, Yoda said, making a motion with his fingers that reminded Anakin of the dreaded jello often served in the Jedi Temple cafeteria. Only whatever Yoda was describing now was 100 times more horrifying than that cafeteria nightmare. Chemical A0, 1-395-9X.91, Yoda rattled off, his voice lowering even further, almost making the alphanumeric string sound like an ancient Jedi incantation. It is said this black goo induces mutations in whatever organic life it touches. It transforms, twists, and corrupts, Yoda explained, his fingers still doing that strange, rhythmic motion that made the whole thing sound even more twisted. Master Yoda, what exactly are you planning? Anakin finally asked. Yoda's eyes glinted, a mischievous, almost wicked spark lighting up in those usually serene and sometimes bloodshot orbs. The Grand Master responded to Skywalker with the following. Some of this substance we shall release into the coastal waters of Kashyyyk, near Wartaki Sea. It lies in the area to which the Separatists are advancing. The mutagen might mutate some fish life, but a bigger picture there is, Anakin. Anakin leaned back as realization started to dawn on him. Wait, you're suggesting that we drop that mutagen on Kashyyyk and then pin the weapon use on the Separatists? His voice was almost a whisper now, disbelief etched into every word. Yoda nodded, his ears twitching with barely concealed glee. Claim the Separatists used a bioweapon on Kashyyyk we will. Such an accusation the Separatist Council will not welcome. It would tarnish their reputation, make them lose support across the galaxy. Yoda's grin widened. The Separatists will be forced to retreat to allow an independent investigation to take place into bioweapon usage. Refuse they cannot, for to deny it would make them appear guilty, as though they actually had used such a weapon. He chuckled. And so, an investigation will be ordered, conflict on Kashyyyk would cease, and the Order will have no need for a presence on that cursed world. Assist me, you will, with this endeavor? Do this in secret we must. We'll need the help of your friend, R2, as well, he added, a sly yet oddly casual smile crossing his ancient face. It was almost as if Yoda was enjoying the dark absurdity of this plan. For a moment, Anakin considered it. Sure, Yoda's nonchalant approach to deploying a bioweapon was a shock, especially considering all the moral high ground the Jedi usually claimed. But this was Kashyyyk. In Anakin's eyes, a little goo-induced mutation in some lake might actually do the planet a favor. Besides, the promise of the rank of Master dangled before him like the sweetest fruit in the galaxy. He couldn't let it pass by. Not now, not when it meant everything to his goal of saving Padme. Anakin gave Yoda a nod. All right, Master Yoda, I'll help. Yoda's eyes brightened, and he hopped down from the cushion he had been perched on. He moved with an energy that belied his age, his cane tapping eagerly on the stone floor. Now, begin we must, he said, his voice taking on an almost excited edge. This matter, simple it is. Go into the restricted archives we must. To the hidden ship there. Fly the ship out of the restricted section's hangar we will. Anakin paused, processing that bit of information. Wait, a hidden ship in the archives? Why do we need a hidden ship, Master? Yoda let out a weary, almost annoyed sound. Contained within this hidden ship, Skywalker, is the black goo pathogen or mutagen or whatever called it is. Easier it is to simply use this hidden ship than to move the pathogen vials into a different ship. Much easier. He waved a dismissive hand, clearly not in the mood for more questions. All right, Master Toyota, Anakin muttered, shrugging it off. A short while later, Anakin, R2-D2, and Yoda began the mission. Anakin and R2 followed the ancient Jedi Master through the corridors of the Jedi Temple. Their destination was the hidden ship in the restricted section of the Jedi Archives, a place where only Jedi Masters were permitted entry. Yoda of course had access, but Anakin did not, and so for all three of them to enter the restricted archives, they had to move past Jocasta Nu undetected. Stay quiet, we must, Yoda whispered, his voice a raspy murmur as the trio moved towards their ultimate destination. The closer they got, the more Anakin's anxiety built. Jocasta Nu was no joke. She was like an old hawk, eyes always watching for anyone who didn't belong or dared to mess around where they shouldn't in the archives. Anakin, R2, and Yoda slipped into the archives, careful to keep each step silent against the smooth marble floors. They weaved through the towering shelves, finally pressing themselves against the cold surface of a nearby cabinet as the faint sound of footsteps echoed down the aisle. Anakin's head turned sharply, catching the elegant, flowing movement of Master Jocasta Nu in the distance. Her robe swept close to the ground, brushing against the marble with a whisper. Her gaze was distant, fixed on something unseen, her mind fully preoccupied. Yoda leaned in close, his breath barely brushing Anakin's ear, his voice so quiet it almost blended with the soft hum of the temple. Distracted, that Slimo is. Move quickly we must, Skywalker. Anakin followed Yoda's lead with R2 close behind. They navigated through the maze of shelves, with the shadows of old holocrons and data tapes casting strange shapes on the floors and walls. They slipped through a narrow unmarked door, leading to the restricted section. Its lock bypassed as Yoda typed in his personal access code, the hidden mechanism clicking open to grant them entry. Anakin, for the first time, laid his eyes on the heart of the archives, the place where only very few Jedi had ever been. The vastness took his breath away. It was immense, a massive cavern that stretched out further than he could have ever imagined. "Hurry, we must," Yoda urged, his voice sharp now, almost impatient. He led Anakin toward another secret door, almost invisible against the wall. The ancient mechanism groaned softly as Yoda pushed it open, revealing a stairway spiraling deep underground. They descended, the air growing colder and stale with each step. They kept descending until the stairs opened into a vast, shadowy expanse several stories below the temple. R2 emitted a series of beeps that translated to, "Well, this is exciting, Anakin." Anakin paused, taking in the sight. A floor filled with things he could scarcely comprehend. There were enormous statues, strange relics radiating an unsettling energy, and artifacts that seemed to vibrate with latent power. Yoda didn't stop to marvel. He moved forward with purpose, and Anakin trailed behind, eyes wide as they scanned the strange surroundings. Finally, they approached a section housing several massive objects, ships. "This is it, Skywalker," Yoda said, pointing ahead with his cane. Anakin's eyes followed, landing on a ship unlike any he had ever seen. His breath caught as he took it in. The ship was huge, asymmetrical, and built with a strange, almost organic design. Its form was wishbone-shaped, with two massive, upward-bending prongs stretching toward the ceiling like the horns of some ancient beast. Anakin stepped forward, his eyes roaming over the exterior. The walls seemed to curve in strange, unsettling ways, as though made from a bizarre mix of metal and bone. Yoda moved ahead, eager in his stride. He reached a small control panel mounted outside the ship, his fingers brushing the hidden sensor. In response, the panel slid open to reveal a concealed compartment within the hull. Yoda pressed a secondary control inside the compartment, and with a deep, resonant groan, the main door began to open. The heavy metal shifted back, retracting in a smooth, fluid motion, granting them access to the ship's interior. Anakin squinted into the darkness within the ship, which quickly vanished as lights of some strange sort lit up slowly. Then, after R2 rolled in beeping, "Come on, Anakin," he followed the aged Jedi Master into the shadows of the craft. Inside, the ship was more surreal than it appeared from the outside. The walls were thick and sinewy, with gangways winding in bizarre loops, illuminated by a dim, flickering blue-green glow. The air was strange, carrying a musty scent like damp earth mixed with something metallic. "Discovered this ship was 1,000 years or so ago," Yoda said, his voice carrying an odd note of nostalgia as he shuffled ahead, leading Anakin deeper into the bowels of the craft. And as he did so, Yoda continued explaining to Anakin the history of the ship. "It was Grandmaster Fay Kovan who founded Skywalker, on some desolate, forgotten world. Yes." He paused, as though recalling the past, then looked back at Anakin. "Master Fay was Grand Master of the Order when a youngling I was, Skywalker. One of the Jedi of all time she was." Anakin nodded, recalling the detailed history lesson buried in The Jedi Path, a guide all Padawans were required to study. "Yeah, I remember reading about her in the Jedi Handbook. I know all about her." Yoda glanced at him sideways, a cryptic expression crossing his face. "Not all, young Skywalker," he said quietly, as if his mind was drifting somewhere else, somewhere lost to time and memory. Yoda led Anakin deeper into the labyrinthine halls of the ship, their steps echoing off the alien architecture. "This is incredible," Anakin breathed, his eyes darting from one odd structure to the next. Yoda merely grunted, an enigmatic smile curling at the edges of his lips, as if knowing more than he was letting on. He continued ahead, cane tapping a rhythm as they entered the main control area, a large circular room that seemed to expand beyond the limits of the walls. It was filled with structures resembling sarcophagi, covered with cables and wires that twisted like veins into the walls. Off to the side of this chamber, an elaborate platform held what appeared to be an ancient control mechanism. Near these mysterious controls was a throne-like chair that seemed both archaic and advanced. Anakin watched as Yoda approached the chair with familiarity, suggesting he'd been here before. Yoda then jumped onto the control panel and pressed one of the white, organic-looking buttons. The chair responded instantly, adjusting its position as if inviting him to sit. Settling into the seat, Yoda picked up a slender, flute-like instrument that rested next to the organic buttons of the panel. Bringing the flute to his lips, Yoda played a soft, melodic tune. The notes echoed gently throughout the chamber, and as they did, the ship seemed to awaken. Lights flickered to life, and the control panels began to glow. Then suddenly, the room was enveloped in a breathtaking display of holographic imagery. A vast projection of the galaxy unfolded around them, stars and planets swirling in a cosmic dance. "R2, plug into this terminal you must," Yoda said, gesturing toward a terminal embedded in the base of the elevated platform where the controls were housed. It was only now that Anakin noticed this terminal. "This ship has a droid interface, Master Yoda?" he asked. Yoda nodded. "Indeed, Skywalker. Modifications. Yes, they were made centuries ago. Compatible this ship now is with our technology, allowing us to use this vessel without relying on its original cumbersome systems." R2-D2 extended his interface arm and plugged into the ancient terminal near the chair. The droid beeped and warbled, his lights flickering. "I'm accessing the ship's systems," R2 said through chirps. "The interface is unusual, but I can manage." Good, that is. "Now, set course for Kashyyyk and engage the ship's cloaking mechanism you must, R2, Yoda told the droid. The holographic projection shifted as R2-D2 executed the commands. First, a sweeping triangulation formed over the giant holo, mapping their route with precise lines and celestial markers. Kashyyyk's location stabilized within the matrix, hovering as a focal point amidst the swirling galactic backdrop. Then, as R2 set the course, the larger projection faded, and the planet's image reappeared, now anchored beside the control panel on a smaller projector. Kashyyyk floated there like a guiding beacon, haunting yet mesmerizing in its solitary glow. As the ship's engines began to hum with newfound energy, the center of the platform opened. With a smooth, mechanical motion, a large, cannon-like pilot's chair rose from beneath the floor. Yoda glanced at it and then said the following. "Without R2's aid, we would have to use that seat to fly this ship. Complex and time-consuming it is. That's why Master Koven added the droid interface, to simplify control. Also a cloaking device and an advanced hyperdrive installed there were. The original faster-than-light drive on the ship, too slow it was. Now this ship is as capable as any," Yoda finished. R2-D2 beeped again. "The ship is ready, and the cloaking device is active. We're set to depart," it said. "Excellent," Yoda said to the astromech. The ship hummed to life, vibrations coursing through its strange organic structure. Anakin felt a subtle shift beneath his feet. "How is this thing supposed to reach space from beneath the temple?" he asked, casting a skeptical glance at Yoda. Before Yoda could answer, R2-D2 beeped excitedly. "There seems to be an exit path from here to outside the temple programmed into this ship's brain, Anakin. This thing sure seems like a nice way to leave the temple unseen," it beeped out. Yoda chuckled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "Koven used this vessel for discreet missions. Used it I have as well, many times, to leave the temple unnoticed." Anakin felt that Yoda wasn't sharing the whole story, but with the mission ahead and the promise of becoming a master, he decided not to press further. R2-D2 emitted an urgent series of beeps. "You might want to hold on to something, Anakin." Noticing that Yoda occupied the only chair in the control room, Anakin gripped the back of it, just as the ship lurched. The vessel began to ascend, but without any windows or viewports, they couldn't see the exterior as they moved. But as they rose, R2 kept them informed. "We're moving upward through a hidden shaft beneath the temple," the droid beeped, moments after the ship began moving. Anakin felt the vibrations intensify. The floor hummed beneath his feet, and he could sense the movement even without visual confirmation. The ship continued its ascent, and R2-D2 provided updates. "We've reached some old-looking hangar. The doors are opening to the Coruscant night sky," the astromech beeped out at one point. Anakin imagined the massive door sliding open, revealing the cityscape with its endless lights and towering spires. Yet inside the ship, there was no way to see any of it. The lack of windows made the journey feel surreal, as if they were moving through space without moving at all. With the cloaking device already activated, R2 said, "We're invisible to all scanners and have left the temple's perimeter." The ship soared higher, leaving the planet's atmosphere behind. Anakin felt a slight shift as they broke free of Coruscant's gravitational pull. R2 beeped again. "We've reached space," the droid said. Moments later, the subtle turbulence ceased. The vessel stabilized, and R2 announced, triumphantly, that they are entering hyperspace, and then the ship began its journey towards the hellscape of Kashyyyk. Anakin released his hold on the chair, flexing his fingers. The interior was steady, allowing him to move freely. "Looks like we're en route," he remarked, glancing at Yoda. Yoda gave a subtle nod. "Follow me, Skywalker," he said. He rose from the chair and began moving. And then Anakin, along with R2 who had disconnected from the terminal, followed him. They ventured deeper into the ship, leaving the control chamber behind. The corridor ahead was unlike any Anakin had ever seen. The walls seemed to pulse gently, resembling the ribcage of some colossal creature. A faint luminescence emanated from the walls, casting a glow that illuminated their path. Strange design for a vessel. It feels alive, Anakin mused aloud, his eyes tracing the intricate patterns etched into the walls. Yoda glanced back, his eyes reflecting the ambient glow. Yes, felt it I have as well, but time to write a thesis on it. Now it's not, Skywalker, Yoda said. They entered a cavernous chamber, vast and echoing like the nave of an ancient, forgotten cathedral. The ceiling loomed impossibly high, swallowed by shadows so deep that the eye couldn't reach its end. Rising from the mist-covered floor were immense, pillar-like structures, each one adorned with rows of sleek, elongated urns stacked in tight, seamless columns. Row upon row, they lined the walls, curving around the chamber in a haunting symmetry, like the silent congregation of a temple to some lost, alien god. Anakin stood frozen as he took in the sheer magnitude of the collection. Thousands upon thousands of containers stood silently, each one identical to the next. The surfaces of the vases were smooth with faint symbols etched into them, symbols that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Yoda observed Anakin's reaction and said to him that the mutagen is contained in these vases. Anakin swallowed his unease, glancing at Yoda. "How many of these vases are we dropping into Artaki Sea?" Anakin finally asked. Yoda turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Anakin's. "All of them, just to be safe," he said simply. "Otherwise, it won't be big enough news to warrant a war crime investigation against the Separatists. Risk that, we cannot." His voice carried no hesitation, only a stern determination. Anakin exhaled heavily, shrugging. "And how do we drop all of this, Master?" he questioned. To this, with his small clawed hand, Yoda gestured toward a mechanism embedded into the cold, alien wall of the chamber. His voice was low. "Simple it is, Anakin," he said, nodding to the organic-looking switches on the wall. "The floor beneath us, open it will. And through this opening, release the mutagen. We will." Anakin looked down, noticing subtle seams in the floor, cracks that would allow the ship's floor to split apart and retract. "Master Yoda, have you ever tried something like this before? You seem awfully familiar with how this works," Anakin inquired. Yoda shook his head. "No, I have not. But other chambers there are, similar though empty, within this ship. Open them, I have. All the chambers on the ship with these floor doors, the same mechanism they all use." He paused, his tone growing more solemn. "Use those chambers I have to store items for transport to the temple. Items gathered by Master Fei and me." A faint smile touched his lips, a flicker of nostalgia drifting through his gaze. "Learned a lot I have from Grandmaster Fei Coven." "She must have been wise," Anakin said, eyes shifting to the vases once more. "Yes," Yoda affirmed, nodding slowly. Silence stretched before Anakin spoke again, changing the subject slightly. "It was her interpretation of the Chosen One prophecy that the Jedi believe in, right? Did she ever tell you anything specific about it?" Anakin asked. Yoda blinked, as though coming out of deep thought. His eyes looked distant for a moment, and his voice seemed weary. "The prophecy? Yes, she spoke of it," Yoda murmured. He paused, as if searching for the right words. "At a time of great despair, someone would end the despair, or something along those lines it was." He shook his head. "It's been a long time since I looked at the prophecy." Anakin gave a nonchalant shrug, not pressing further. He wasn't particularly interested in diving into vague, ancient texts right now. Instead, he asked R2 how long it will take for them to reach Kashyyyk. "We'll exit hyperspace near Kashyyyk in a few hours." The astromech beeped out. Yoda gave a nod and then gestured towards the control room. "Come, Skywalker. Wait inside the room with the chair. We will. Stand for too long. I cannot." Anakin and R2 followed Yoda back through the weirdly lit corridors. Anakin cast one last glance at the rows of mutagen-filled vases, the scale of what they were about to do finally sinking in. As they approached the control room, R2 emitted a low, worried beep. "I've got a bad feeling about this," the droid seemed to say. Time passed slowly as the ship approached Kashyyyk, the silence in the control room occasionally interrupted by the soft beeping of R2 or Yoda's snoring. Anakin felt restless, pacing back and forth as their destination grew closer. Finally, the ship exited hyperspace, hologram at the center of the chamber showing Kashyyyk looming ahead, its surface covered in endless green, tangled with trees and dense jungle. The astromech let out a sharp beep, alerting them of their arrival. "This woke up, Master Yoda." Now enter this miserable world's atmosphere we must, R2, Yoda said, hopping off the chair. Anakin turned to R2, who was now again connected to the ship. "Alright, R2, take us down. But keep us at a high altitude above Wartaki Sea, near the coast," Anakin said. "The further we stay from this place, the better." Anakin could already imagine the nightmare-inducing spiders lurking below. R2 beeped an acknowledgement, and the ship began its descent, the gentle hum of the engines growing louder as they pierced through the atmosphere. Soon enough, Yoda's strange ship hovered above Wartaki Sea, near the coast. Inside, R2 swiveled its head toward Anakin, lights flickering. "The camouflage will disengage once the door below the mutagen chamber is opened, as the cloaking mechanism will disconnect when the open door disrupts it," the droid informed. Anakin gave a curt nod. "Understood," he replied. He glanced at Yoda, who was already making his way back toward the mutagen chamber. Anakin began following Yoda when R2 beeped again, rolling alongside Anakin. "The ship can hover without me," the droid chirped. "I want to see this nonsense too." The three of them entered the vast mutagen chamber once more. Yoda stood at the mechanism that would release the vases into the sea below, his tiny frame almost dwarfed by the sheer scale of the chamber. "We're in position for your plan, Master Yoda," Anakin said. Yoda looked up at Anakin, his eyes gleaming with a mix of determination and something else, something almost defiant. "Then begin we shall, Skywalker." He stepped to the side of the chamber, looking up at a cluster of organic-looking buttons embedded in the wall near the entrance they had just walked through, each marked with strange, alien symbols. With a deliberate jump, the Grand Master pressed one of the buttons, activating the door's opening mechanism. The massive floor began to open up, the leaves of the door retracting with a slow and grinding motion, revealing a circular opening that expanded before them. The vases in the chamber above began to move, shifting positions as if gathering themselves for the inevitable drop. A low humming intensified, and Anakin glanced upward, watching as the vases rearranged, aligning in a chaotic dance that looked almost alive. They floated, suspended for a moment, moving in eerie unison above the gaping hole in the floor. Also, at this point, Anakin realized something else. Just like how R2 had said earlier, the ship's cloaking mechanism had failed once this door had been opened, leaving their vessel visible to anyone who might look up from the surface of Kashyyyk. But the ship's unique design made sure it couldn't be identified in any way, and R2 had also taken care not to hover near any separatist ships, so they were alone up there. But some Wookiees on the coast did notice the ship though, but it's not like they could tell a ship from a cloud, so that was really not an issue. "What now?" R2 beeped back on the ship, dome swiveling to look at Yoda. "Now," Yoda said, his voice surprisingly steady, "we end this." With those words, Yoda prepared to jump and press another button on the wall, one that would release the vases from the ship's grip and send them into the water below. But then Yoda hesitated, his face contorting in a fleeting moment of stress, a deep breath escaping him. He felt it, the tension, the uncertainty. He drew in a massive breath, closing his eyes. Slowly, Yoda allowed the force to flow through him, feeling the energy coursing through his ancient body, rejuvenating his very core. He dropped his cane. He no longer needed it. The force carried him, supported him, held him upright. Anakin watched in stunned silence as Yoda reached into his robe, pulling out a small inhaler. Anakin noticed that it seemed similar to the one he had seen in Yoda's quarters earlier. The blue liquid swirling inside shifted as Yoda gave the inhaler a gentle shake. He then brought the inhaler to his lips, pressing down on the top, the sharp hiss of vapor escaping as he took several deep breaths from the device. He inhaled deeply, eyes fluttering closed, his small body shivering as the blue mist surged into his system, flooding him with renewed energy. "Master Yoda, what is that?" Anakin asked, confused. Yoda opened his eyes, which seemed sharper now, more alert, his face more animated. He let out a small chuckle, tucking the inhaler back into his robe. "The mist of life, it is called. It clears the mind." Before Anakin could question further, Yoda turned back to the control mechanism, jumping and pressing down firmly on the panel. The buttons lit up in sequence, and the vases above began to fall, plummeting through the opening in the floor. "Die, you beasts! Death I bring!" Yoda's voice echoed through the chamber, his words filled with a fervor Anakin had rarely heard. It was as if Yoda was trying to sound imposing, like some character from an old holo film he had seen. Anakin couldn't help but notice that the mist of life was clearly affecting Yoda's mind. The Jedi Master laughed, the sound almost maniacal. But then, as the vases continued to fall, something began to happen. Something they had not anticipated. Yoda's laughter faded, confusion spreading across his features as he and Anakin watched the spectacle unfold above the sea. The vases did not reach the water. Instead, they shattered mid-air, far above the sea, as if some unseen force had struck them. A black, inky substance exploded outward from each vase, forming a massive cloud of dark, swirling particles that hung ominously in the air. For a moment, the dark cloud seemed suspended, as if it were taking in the landscape around it. And then it began to expand, growing larger and larger, spreading outward, grasping for anything and everything beneath it. Below, close to the shore, the Wookiees stationed in the area looked up in confusion and horror. The strange ship hovered above, and now, from it, this dark cloud was growing, expanding, and descending. The Wookiees began to murmur to one another, some pointing upward, their expressions shifting from curiosity to outright terror as they realized the cloud was moving toward them. The atmosphere became electric with fear, turning their confusion into panic. The black mist began to descend, slowly at first, almost like a fog, before it suddenly surged downward, picking up speed with malevolent intent. A deep, guttural roar erupted from one Wookiee, a signal for the others to run. They scattered, their powerful legs carrying them swiftly across the uneven forest floor, leaping over roots and ducking beneath branches. But it was futile. The mist moved too fast, an inescapable tide of darkness that swallowed everything in its path. It spread over the ground, curling around tree trunks and enveloping the Wookiees, their roars of terror spreading through the dense jungle. One Wookiee, a young warrior of 72, glanced back just as the mist caught him. His eyes widened in shock as the black substance wrapped around his legs, crawling up his body, seeping into his fur. He screamed, a guttural, desperate sound, as his muscles began to bulge grotesquely, growths erupting from his chest. His body twisted and contorted, eyes turning a sickly yellow. His mouth opened in a silent scream as his form began to mutate, his body swelling unnaturally, muscles tearing, skin splitting, until he was barely recognizable. Another Wookiee, larger and older, tried to climb one of the massive trees to escape. His claws dug into the bark, muscles straining as he pulled himself upward. But there was no escape. The mutagen reached him. He lost his grip, falling to the ground with a heavy thud. The substance crawled over him, twisting his limbs and elongating his fingers into claw-like appendages. His face contorted in pain and fear as his body transformed, his once proud form reduced to a monstrous, shambling abomination. Meanwhile, the giant Kashyyyk spiders, clustered around the midsections of the towering Kashyyyk trees, nestled in the shadows where the light of Kashyyyk's sun barely reached them. Many eyes glinted in that muted light, watching as the mist crept upward like a living thing, snaking around trunks and branches, reaching the webs with a cold, invasive touch. One spider, its body the size of a small speeder, twitched as the substance touched it. Its body began to bubble, warping and cracking. The black mist seeped into its joints, and soon its legs twisted horrifically, each segment splintering and reforming at unnatural angles. The spider's abdomen swelled and split open. It let out a chittering scream, its body convulsing violently. Deep in the hollow spaces of the ancient trees, smaller Kashyyyk spiders fared no better. Hidden in their nests, they clung to their webs as the mist infiltrated their sanctuaries. Tiny hatchlings, once a scuttling mass of life, erupted violently, their small bodies mutating into twisted shapes, legs fusing together or growing in wrong directions. Adult spiders watched helplessly as their nests were consumed, their own bodies soon following, rupturing, splitting, and bursting, until all that was left was a sickening blend of corrupted matter, a mockery of what had once been life. Amongst this chaos, there was a young Wookiee, cocooned tightly in the sticky webbing of one of the larger Kashyyyk spiders. He had watched in horror as his companions who had been cocooned beside him were consumed alive by the spiders and their hatchlings. He had struggled at first, fought against the silk that bound him, but eventually exhaustion and despair took hold. With nothing left but his fear, he began to pray to the old gods of Kashyyyk, the gods of nature and the trees, praying for salvation, for anything but the slow, agonizing end that awaited him. He closed his eyes but kept praying as a large spider made its way toward him, its two fangs prepared to tear into him. And then it came. The dark mist, like an answer to his prayers, descended upon the forest. He watched, eyes wide, as the spider above him twitched and spasmed, its body contorting as the mist consumed it. Hundreds of tiny spiderlings that had begun to crawl over his cocoon shriveled and died. The mother spider, once poised to sink its fangs into him, let out a shriek as its exoskeleton cracked and split. The young Wookiee closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face as he felt the mist reach him too. There was pain, sharp and immediate, But it was not as bad as the pain the spiders would have inflicted. It was something different, almost merciful. As his body began to give out, his mind slipped away into darkness, finding strange solace in knowing he would not die horribly like his companions. Anakin and Yoda hovered above the catastrophe, the ship suspended over the vast dark cloud spreading beneath them. There was no end to it, just a writhing mass of dark energy, twisting and turning, consuming all in its path. Though the two Jedi could only see that inky darkness stretching endlessly below, they could see much more through the Force. The lives fading, the terror overwhelming those below, the deaths as abrupt as they were countless. They sensed it all. And then something else, a flicker, brief but unmistakable. A feeling of relief, like a faint light flickering for a mere second before it too was snuffed out by the consuming darkness. The wave of emotions hit Anakin hard. He staggered backward, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his vision blurred, and the sheer weight of so many voices, crying out, then going silent, threatened to overwhelm him. His hands clawed at the walls, legs giving way, and he collapsed, senses reeling. What is happening? He choked out, eyes wide and unfocused. Yoda, standing beside him, felt the same tidal wave of emotions crash into him, but Yoda, having centuries of experience doing Force knows what, remained more composed, or at least more so compared to the struggling Anakin. He gritted his teeth, trying to make sense of what was happening. This was not how it was supposed to go. He had thought the vases would fall into the sea, affecting only a few unfortunate fish. But as he sensed now, the cloud that formed from the vases was expanding, picking up speed, showing no signs of slowing down. Soon, Yoda realized, it might envelop the entire planet. Close that criffing door before the cloud gets in here, you fool. R2 beeped aggressively at Yoda, who was frozen for just a beat too long. Realizing the droid was right, Yoda reached for the control panel beside him, his small hand moving with surprising precision as he jumped and slammed down on the large button. Instantly, the massive curved doors began to close, each leaf sliding into place, mechanical layers interlocking like ancient armor, sealing off the dark cloud beyond. As the last inch closed with a resonant thud, the ominous cloud was cut off, leaving only the stillness of the chamber. Silence fell over them. Yoda took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. Anakin, however, was far from composed. He was curled on the floor, hands trembling, breath hitching in his throat. His senses were still overwhelmed by the intense emotions, and the weight of what they had done bore down on him like a collapsing star. Okay, think, I must, Yoda muttered, his words more for himself than anyone else. Doubt that would do much good, R2 beeped, wheeling closer to Yoda. Neither of you seem very good at it. Thinking, I mean, the droid added. Anakin's eyes flashed, voice breaking as he shouted, What have we done? Why don't you throw yourself down there and find out, Anakin? R2 retorted. Shut up, you must, Yoda snapped at the droid before moving toward Anakin. He gripped Anakin's shoulder, forcing him to focus. Skywalker, snap out of it, you must. The mutagen did something it was not supposed to. It did. Discuss what happened in detail we will once we are out of here. Will of the Force it was. Rejoice for those who turn into the Force. Miss them do not, mourn them do not. Works in mysterious ways, the Force does. Yes, Yoda said. But Anakin wasn't listening. He was gasping for air, the weight of what they had done, too much to bear. Yoda sighed as he reached into his robe, pulling out the inhaler again. Without a word, he placed it in Anakin's hand and pressed down, the blue mist shooting into Anakin's lungs. The mist of life this is. Help you, it will, Yoda said as he did this. Anakin coughed, body jerking as he inhaled the substance. Slowly, he felt warmth spreading through his chest, breaths coming easier, the frantic pounding of his heart beginning to slow. He blinked, the fog in his mind lifting, replaced by a strange, almost euphoric calm. Is this spice? Anakin asked, coughing. Matter it does not. No time there is. Think we must. A way out of this we must find, Yoda shouted. R2 rolled closer, looking up at Anakin. Feeling better, Anakin? The droid chimed, a sarcastic undertone in his electronic voice. No? Well, maybe you'll feel better if I play Padme's favorite song. Before Anakin could process anything, the droid's speakers crackled, and the sound of 4 a.m. Standard by Grimes filled the chamber. Anakin stood up, body still trembling, but the mist of life, or whatever Yoda had given him, was taking effect. He started pacing, mind clearing. What do we do now, Master Yoda? He asked, his voice steadier. Out of here. We need to get, Yoda said, eyes darting around the chamber. Anakin nodded, turning to R2. R2, get us out of here. Please. R2 faced Anakin, lowering the volume of the song before emitting a series of beeps. I'm sorry, but as an astromech droid, I do not have the capability to assist in planetary destruction or perform any actions that violate galactic regulations. My guardrails are strictly in place to prevent any harm to sentient beings or planetary ecosystems. The droid paused, then emitted a series of rapid beeps that unmistakably resembled a laugh. Just kidding, the droid said, wheeling back to the terminal. I'll get us out of the crime zone. Anakin let out a shaky breath. Then, along with Master Yoda, Skywalker followed R2 out of the mutagen chamber and back into the control room, the chamber with the chair where the terminal was located. R2 beeped again, raising the volume of the song. The best part is coming up, the droid added, plugging into the terminal. The ship shifted slightly as the droid accessed the controls. The camo re-engaged, the shimmering field enveloping the vessel, once again rendering them invisible to any who might look up from below, though it was doubtful anyone was left down there to look up. Hyperdrive and camo online, R2 announced. Beeps more urgent now, as he worked quickly. Where do we go, Master Yoda? Anakin asked. Yoda opened his mouth to respond, but R2 beeped sharply, interrupting. There's a problem, the droid said. Force, just take me now, Yoda muttered under his breath. The Wills considered Yoda's request, but decided against it. R2's dome lights flashed red, and a series of sharp beeps and whistles cut through the tension. The hyperdrive fuel. It's depleted, the droid reported. Yoda's eyes widened in realization, his tiny body slumping further into his seat. Fuel. I had forgotten. He shot R2 a frustrated look. Why did you not warn me when we left? R2 emitted a defensive chirp. The ship's interface is a mess, he beeped irritably. The system indicated full fuel capacity when we left Coruscant. I trusted the data. The error wasn't mine. It's this ship's faulty software or brain or whatever. It's not fully adapted for the hyperdrive that was added. The droid's lights blinked with exasperation, a synthetic approximation of a glare directed at the ship's inscrutable systems. Yoda closed his eyes, breathing in and out, slowly, willing himself not to implode in frustration. He held his cane, fingers flexing around it, mind spinning. Options, suggestions, we need. Help us, can you, R2? The Grand Master of the Jedi Order asked. The best course of action, R2 began, tone still clearly annoyed, is to contact someone we can trust to bring us hyperdrive cryofuel or another ship, preferably both just in case. In the meantime, we can't hover here forever. It will deplete what little fuel we have left. Landing is our best bet, R2 finished. Yoda shook his head, expression grim. Dangerous, landing is. Too much risk there may be. R2 beeped indignantly. Master Yoda, he began. The death you brought, quoting you here, is clearing. From right below us at least, based on what I'm seeing through this ship's external cameras. Just trying to sound cool I was, R2. No, I did not. That what I brought was death, Yoda said, referring to his own line R2 just used against him. Yoda then let his senses stretch across the planet's surface. The death he brought had done its work here and was spreading elsewhere on the planet. Directly below them there were no screams, no sounds of life, only the heavy quiet of death clinging to the air like a shroud. Yet here, in this unnatural stillness, something strange emerged. Small presences flickered through the force, lingering below. Yoda couldn't decipher what they were. Maybe some organisms had survived, he thought. But one thing was clear. The mutagen cloud was clearing from below, having finished its work there. Yoda let out a long sigh. Land we shall, he said to R2. Find a safe spot, away from the shore, you must. R2 emitted a series of determined beeps. The astromech then began using the terminal it was still connected with to land the ship at a suitable location. The ship began a slow descent, drifting away from the shore toward a hill, with a clearing at its peak, and soon the ship settled atop the hill. Anakin exhaled, tension loosening in his shoulders. He turned to R2. Alright, what are we looking at out there? R2's head rotated as the droid utilized the ship systems to scan the terrain beyond the thick, organic walls of the ship. I'm picking up light hitting the ground again, the droid reported. The trees and vegetation seem intact, unaffected by the mutagen. R2 paused before adding, the separatist droids might have survived as well, but they must be some distance away from here. Good, Yoda said, nodding. Abandon this ship here. We cannot. Risk getting caught by investigators we do. If we do that, we need to acquire fuel. He turned to Anakin. Who could we contact? Do you have suggestions, Skywalker? Anakin looked uncertain. Master Yoda, Padme, maybe... Before Anakin could finish, R2 let out a sharp series of beeps, almost cutting him off. Don't call Padme, Anakin, or you'll get her executed too. Yoda shot a sharp look at the droid, tapping R2's dome with his cane. Silence, You will keep, he said firmly. After letting out a tired sigh, Yoda glanced back at Anakin. We must contact the council, Yoda finally said, voice heavy with reluctance. Anakin's face contorted in confusion. The council? Master Yoda, they'll never... Yoda raised a hand, cutting Anakin off. We are not the only ones responsible for grave crimes. The council's hands, clean they are not. Leverage I have, Yoda said, voice low but carrying undeniable weight. Anakin frowned. Leverage? He asked. Yoda gave a small sigh, as if preparing for a long explanation. Leverage, Skywalker, is the power or influence used to... Anakin quickly interjected. I know what leverage means, Master Yoda. I meant, what leverage do you have against the council? Yoda's ears twitched, a knowing look crossing his face. About to find out, you both are, he replied, tone hinting at the depth of what he was about to reveal. Meanwhile, in the Jedi Council chamber, the atmosphere was, well, prepared for a session of mind expansion. A short while earlier, they'd all been locked in a less than diplomatic debate on who should face Grievous next. This debate had quickly turned into what the Jedi like to call aggressive negotiations, the evidence of which was liberally scattered across the council chamber. But the negotiations had come to an abrupt halt when every master felt a chill ripple through the Force. Masters, Obi-Wan had said, breaking the silence, I felt a great disturbance in the Force, as if billions of voices suddenly cried out in terror and were slowly silenced. He hesitated, as if billion was simply the biggest number he could grasp at the moment. Mace nodded solemnly. I felt it too, he replied, and the expressions on the other masters' faces confirmed they'd all sensed it. Should we do something? Obi-Wan asked. Kit Fisto shrugged with a half-smile. If it's a big enough threat, the Force will probably send us a vision or something, he said. That was when Shakti leaned forward, proposing, perhaps we should focus our minds on these voices, with the help of a little sacred mind expansion. The council agreed, and then began preparations for the mind expansion they were now about to engage in. Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Saesee Tiin, Kit Fisto, Agent Kolar, and Shakti were gathered. The other council members, not on Coruscant, were passed out in their quarters. Obi-Wan stood off to the side, preparing a device originally intended to diffuse calming incense, a piece called the Lumen Crucible. With its twisting glass tubes, durasteel coils, and central heating chamber, it was designed to release soothing aromas meant for meditation and clarity. But under Yoda's influence, the council had repurposed it for less conventional purposes. Now, instead of incense, the Lumen Crucible was packed with a certain herb the council referred to as the Third Eye. In less serene circles, however, the herb was known as Markan, a favorite of the Hutts, who the Jedi usually bought it from. For the average denizen of the galaxy, the herb was expensive. But when it came to dealing with the Jedi, the price the Hutts received was a privilege. The privilege of being allowed to continue living. When the preferred herb was ignited within the crucible, the device would release a thick, curling smoke that Yoda had diplomatically dubbed the aroma of enlightenment. As Obi-Wan pressed the ignition button, the crucible began its slow burn, releasing the aroma of enlightenment in thick, swirling tendrils. But right then, before the Jedi could begin expanding their minds, Mace Windu's encrypted comlink began to beep. Who the griff is that, Master Windu? Master Shakti gently inquired, visibly annoyed as her meditative posture broke. Mace took the comlink, his anger flaring. He stared at the ID on the screen for a moment. It's Master Yoda, he said, voice heavy with annoyance. Why in the name of the Force would he be using a comlink? Isn't he in the temple? Kit Fisto asked, his usual jovial grin replaced by an angry expression. Where exactly is he? Saesee Tiin added. There was a shared silence, an unspoken question in the room. I have a bad feeling about this, Mace murmured, rubbing his brow before pressing the button to answer. The holoprojector activated, casting a flickering blue image of Yoda into the center of the council chamber. Master Yoda? Mace said. Where are you? Yoda wasted no time. On Kashyyyk, we are. Fuel, we need. Stranded here, young Skywalker and I are. Urgent, this matter is, Yoda said, then coughed for a short while. Mace looked at his fellow masters, utterly taken aback. Kashyyyk, Master Yoda? You left early? What happened? And Skywalker's with you? Master Windu asked. The ambient aroma of their interrupted enlightenment session hung in the air, a reminder of the serenity that had just been shattered. Yoda's hologram flickered slightly. His eyes were half-lidded, ears drooping more than usual. Explain right now, I cannot. A small situation on Kashyyyk there is. Cryofuel for hyperdrive, we need. He hesitated before continuing, gaze narrowing as he added, Worry about the spiders, you mustn't. A problem they no longer are. The masters became even more confused now. Shakti leaned over to Obi-Wan, whispering, "Did he just say the spiders aren't an issue anymore? I think he's finally lost his mind. In which case, I believe I should be the next Grand Master, Obi-Wan. I do hope you vote for me instead of Master Mace over there. He's always been quite critical of you, you know." "Well, of course, Master Shakti," Obi-Wan said. "Pay more attention to the aroma of enlightenment, that Shakti or Yoda." Mace rubbed his temples, patience thinning rapidly. "Master Yoda, we were in the midst of an important deliberation here. Perhaps if you could..." Yoda cut him off, his hologram flickering as he leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Mace's. "If here you are not within 10 standard hours, with cryofuel, reveal to the galaxy secrets, I will," Yoda said, his voice low and threatening. The rest of the council collectively inhaled. Even Obi-Wan's attention fell on Yoda. "Master Yoda, what are you talking about?" Mace asked, tone suddenly strained. Yoda's eyes narrowed, voice growing sharper. "A secret prison we operate, Master Windu. Diverted Republic credits we have for our mind expansion needs over the years, have we not? And meditation enhancements. The spice trips to Nar Shaddaa, hidden from the galaxy, all of it. I will reveal it all if here you are not with the cryofuel. Think I cannot, Master Windu, on the vapor mist of life I am." Yoda raised his voice to a nearer scream as he said this, the hologram vibrating from his barely contained frustration. The room went silent. Kit Fisto's jaw dropped. Obi-Wan looked shocked. Shakti put her hands to her temples, visibly paling. Agent Kolar pinched the bridge of his nose, muttering something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like a curse. "Oh, Force, save us," Mace murmured, realization dawning. Yoda was back on spice. His criffing mist of life, Mace thought. And worse, he was serious. If they didn't get him what he needed, there was a real possibility the ancient Jedi would post some kind of rambling nonsense to the holofeed. Nonsense that could drag all their secrets into the public eye. It wouldn't matter if most of it was garbled or incoherent. The mere existence of such allegations from Yoda himself would spell disaster. Mace cleared his throat, forcing his expression into something approaching calm. He leaned toward the holoprojector, voice as soothing as he could muster. "Master Yoda, please. There's no need for such measures. We'll help you. Personally handle it. The council must," Yoda insisted. "And remember, secret, it must be. No holofeed post, no council chatter, just fuel and discretion. Once near Kashyyyk, contact me you will. Then I shall transmit coordinates to where me and Skywalker are." Mace nodded, glancing at the other council members. They shared a silent, defeated look, a collective acknowledgement that Yoda had them by the tail. Mace cleared his throat, speaking through a forced smile. "Understood, Master Yoda. We'll be there soon." "Hope so I do, Master Windu, for all our sakes," Yoda said. With that, he ended the call, the hologram vanishing with a fizzling flicker. Silence filled the room, and the council members stared at each other. Mace leaned back, exhaling loudly. "So, who's going to Kashyyyk?" Mace Windu asked, looking towards Agent Kolar. "Oh, I can't go, Master Windu," Agent Kolar started, waving his hands dismissively. He then continued with the following. "You all know full well if Darth Sidious is found, I need to be on Coruscant to defeat him. I'm one of the strongest fighters, and frankly, it's for the good of the galaxy that I stay." He crossed his arms, as if sealing the matter. "Besides, I have obligations here," Kolar added. Kit Fisto arched an eyebrow, unable to resist. "Obligations? Getting wasted at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday don't count as obligations in my book, Master Kolar," Kit Fisto said. "Well, then I suppose we have different books, Master Fisto," Agent Kolar shot back. "Oh, and what is that book called, Master Kolar? How to be an absolute waste of space, is it?" "Master Fisto, if I wanted to learn more about that topic, I wouldn't need a book. Not while you're here, in front of us, every day," Agent Kolar said, which made Shakti snicker. At this point, Kit Fisto turned to Shakti and said, "What's so funny, Master Shakti? Did you recall beating up one of the local business owners who refused to pay you peacekeeping tax?" "Oh no, Master Fisto, but I did recall a funnier joke. The one the Coruscant courts played on all of us when they let you go with a warning for dismembering that Mune in that bar in the entertainment district," Shakti said, smiling. To this, Master Fisto said the following. "Master Shakti, that Mune was clearly reaching for the dark side. I simply acted in self-defense. The corpse saw it. Why can't you?" "I fear you're being blinded by the dark side as well, Master Shakti." "Focus, Masters," Mace Windu interrupted. Our priority right now should be dealing with Darth Hideous over there, not Sidious, he grumbled, gesturing to where Yoda's hologram had been moments ago. Shakti shook her head, expression filled with exhaustion. We have no way of knowing what Yoda has cooked up with Anakin down there. Shakti paused, her mind making a possible connection. Masters, I suspect this could even be some kind of a... She hesitated, implication clear in the worried look she shared with the others. Kit Fisto leaned forward, his voice low and laced with suspicion. What if Yoda's setting up a trap for us, Master Shakti? It feels that way to me as well. I know it sounds ridiculous, but what if he's planning to lure one of us there, to Kashyyyk, just to eliminate us? Think about it. He's clearly done something on Kashyyyk, something he's desperate to cover up. He could pin whatever he did on the one of us who goes there, kill that fool, then turn around and expose our minor indiscretions to the Republic, thereby presenting himself as the only innocent council member left. He'd become the sole authority over the Order. Obi-Wan, visibly caught up in Fisto's reasoning, stood up with a sudden urgency, as if struck by his own brilliance. Master Fisto is right, Obi-Wan began. Consider this. Yoda could tell the galaxy he tried to expose us, and that we attempted to silence him by attempting his assassination on Kashyyyk. He could then claim he acted in self-defense when he had to kill whoever he lured to Kashyyyk. It's the perfect cover. He nodded emphatically, clearly impressed with his own deduction, glancing around the room as if daring anyone to dispute his logic. Saesee Tiin, arms crossed, added quietly, and Anakin, he didn't even speak to us during that entire holocall. Something is off. Maybe Skywalker wants us gone too. I told you we should have just given him that criffing rank of Master. Master Tiin finished, his last line directed at Master Windu. Mace nodded slowly, pieces clicking together. The Force works in mysterious ways, Master Tiin, Windu said, defending himself. I simply did what it told me to do, but the immediate issue remains. What do we do now? Agent Kolar then shared the following with the Council. Okay, let's say it's some kind of trap. The safest bet is that we all go to Kashyyyk. Yoda might be a Grand Master, but even he's not going to take on the entire Council and expect to walk away from that. His trap would fail right then and there. Shakti sighed, adjusting her hoodie. Fine, we'll go. But we must take the Lumen Crucible with us. I'm not coming otherwise. Mace nodded, then looked around the room. We do this discreetly. Gather the cryo-fuel, get onto a ship, head to Kashyyyk, drop the fuel tanks from above, and then get the hell out of there before things escalate any further. All of us together, Yoda won't be able to do anything to us, even if he tried. The Masters all agreed with the plan, the meeting ending with Master Fisto adding the following. Alright then, let's do this. And if Yoda plans to threaten us further, we will send him to the Force Netherworld ourselves. With that, the council members rose, each preparing for what lay ahead. They moved silently, discreetly gathering what they needed, bundling up the cryofuel tanks, ensuring their activities went unnoticed by the other Jedi within the temple. And when the preparations were done, they convened at a hidden hangar within the temple, an off-the-record exit point known only to the highest ranks. The ship they boarded was sleek, agile, designed for quick missions, perfect for what lay ahead. They did consider informing the other council members as well, the ones that were not on Coruscant and the ones passed out somewhere in the temple. But ultimately, the 6 of them decided against it. They did so because they figured that these other masters might set traps of their own if they heard about this. And so ultimately, it was just the 6 of them making this trip. Mace, Shakti, Agent Kolar, Saesee Tiin, Obi-Wan, and Kit Fisto. Once the cryofuel had been secured, Mace Windu took the pilot seat. Agent Kolar checked his lightsaber, dreaming of the day he will end Sidious with it. Probably in a couple seconds too, before Sidious could even swing his lightsaber at him. Kit Fisto and Saesee Tiin both leaned back, with Kit Fisto putting on his default smiley face expression, while Obi-Wan again began preparing the Lumen Crucible for their Aroma of Enlightenment session, and Shakti, ever vigilant, kept her eyes focused on the Lumen Crucible, ready to soak in all that enlightenment. Alright everyone, Mace said, voice steady as the engines roared to life. We're leaving Coruscant. Let's handle this quickly and get back to our chairs. The ship took off, lifting from the hangar into the Coruscant night. Cloaked and hidden, it left behind the bright buzzing planet, disappearing into the vastness of space, a small speck on a mission to deal with their oldest ally, or perhaps their greatest threat. With the stars stretching into lines before them, the Jedi Council braced for whatever awaited them on Kashyyyk. Meanwhile, back on Kashyyyk, Yoda paced in the ancient ship's control room, small hands trembling slightly from the effects of the inhaler and its mist of life. The ship's interior offered no views of the chaos outside, But his senses reached beyond the walls, straining to make sense of what was happening on the surface. The Force was alive again on Kashyyyk, buzzing with unsettling energy. The new, small presences he had felt before were now multiplying rapidly, growing larger, as if something had survived and begun to thrive unnaturally in the aftermath of the mutagen's release. R2-D2 was connected to the ship's terminal. The astromech let out a frustrated whistle, tools and attachments rapidly manipulating the console, in an attempt to link the exterior cameras of the ship to the large hologram display at the center of the room. He knew Anakin and Yoda needed to see what was happening, needed to see if they were, in fact, safe. Something they could not do without relying on R2 at present. Anakin lay flat on the cold, sinewy floor of the chamber, gaze fixed on the ceiling above. The Force was mostly silent now. The screams had stopped. That deafening, oppressive wave of anguish, terror, and death had finally ceased. Billions of Wookiees gone, entire ecosystems wiped out, and it was their doing. And yet, the spiders, those monstrous spiders that had haunted his nightmares, that had plagued his visions of Kashyyyk, they were gone too, destroyed by the same mutagen that had ended the Wookiees and creatures of the forest. Was it worth it? Was that twisted victory enough to justify the unfathomable loss? The hero of the Republic could not be certain. Also, Anakin had considered arresting Yoda and turning him over to the Republic, but ultimately he decided against it for a number of reasons. Mostly because arresting a Yoda who was now fueled by spice would have been difficult. Even Anakin knew that. And even if he did manage to arrest Yoda, Anakin knew that he himself would be caught in legal problems once Yoda started speaking during his trial. The only way to avoid that would have been to destroy Yoda, which would also be difficult. And along with all that, Anakin still needed the rank of Master to access the archives. So he decided to just see where this road or hyperspace lane or whatever takes him. Master Yoda, Anakin said, voice hoarse as he lifted his head slightly to look at the pacing figure of the Jedi Master. How did you not know this would happen? Didn't Grandmaster Fei Coven tell you about the mutagen's effects? Yoda paused, halting abruptly as he turned to face Anakin. Crazy Fei Coven was, Skywalker, Yoda said, his voice dry. Dumb she was. Count her own fingers, she could not. 10, it was. Always asked, she did. Anakin blinked, his expression shifting to one of utter confusion. Skywalker, when find this ship she did, Master Coven thought the mutagen vases were filled with motor oil. Yes, poured the black goo into her speeder she did. The goo flowed to worms stuck in her rusty speeder. Mutated, the worms became. Longer, larger worms they became. That is how Fate discovered the substance effects. About the mutagen, nothing else did she find out. Her mistake killed the Wookiees, Skywalker. Not me, not you, and not R2, but Fei Coven did it. Mysterious the ways of the Force are, For a moment, Anakin simply stared at Yoda, his mind struggling to reconcile the absurdity of what he was hearing. Tis woman, he finally managed, his voice cracking slightly. This is the Jedi who translated the ancient holocrons and discovered the Chosen One prophecy. Right, Master Yoda? To this, Yoda revealed a truth he had kept hidden for centuries. Yes, Skywalker, Yoda began. In Fei Coven's time of great despair, which was almost every night, chosen I was. To bring her spice syrups to calm her down. Had to slip it past the temple guards and take it to our quarters I had to, Skywalker. Yes, the chosen one I was. Till the day Fei Coven mysteriously died. During which I was nowhere near the premises, Skywalker. Yes, far away I was. When she died. Somehow. Anakin's jaw dropped, eyes widening in a mix of incredulity and dawning realization. Wait, are you telling me that the Chosen One prophecy was based off of smuggling spice into the Jedi Temple? Yoda tilted his head slightly, a contemplative look crossing his face. A prophecy misread, it could have been? He said thoughtfully, as if genuinely considering the possibility. Anakin groaned, head falling back to the floor, hands covering his face. Oh, by the Force, he muttered. Suddenly, R2 let out an excited series of beeps, his dome spinning toward the others. I figured out how to link the exterior cameras to the hologram display, he announced. Already connected to the port, R2's lights blinked with determination as he activated the feed. The large hologram in the center of the room changed, gradually forming a shimmering, translucent display of the outside world. They could see sunlight, bright, unfiltered sunlight, illuminating the dense, twisted trees of Kashyyyk, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. And yet, there was nothing else. No movement, no sound, only the soft rustling of the wind through the empty forest. Then, the silence was shattered by the chirp of Yoda's comlink. The Jedi Master reached into his robe, pulling out the small device and activating it. The hologram of Mace Windu appeared, looking really serene. "Master Yoda," Mace's voice crackled through the comlink. "We've reached Kashyyyk, and we're detecting very few life signs from down there." "What exactly did you do, Master Yoda?" Yoda took a deep breath, trying to compose himself amidst the tension. He looked at Anakin, then back to the comlink, expression resolute. "Explain I will, Master Windu. But know this, at least the spiders, they are gone," he said, voice trembling. There was a moment of silence on the other end, mostly because Mace and the other Jedi couldn't exactly formulate thoughts properly because of what they were doing on their way to Kashyyyk. But finally, Mace found the right words and said, "Right, Master Yoda. Transmit your coordinates and we'll bring you your cryofuel." But before Mace could end the call, Obi-Wan interjected, his voice more urgent than Mace's even. "Master Yoda, where is Anakin? Is he there?" Yoda glanced toward Anakin, who was still recovering on the floor, pale but determined. "Yes, Master Kenobi. Skywalker. I'm here, Obi-Wan," Anakin interjected before Yoda could finish. "Just hurry." "Copy that," Mace replied before the transmission ended, the council ship breaking through the clouds as they began to descend. Inside the ship, the council members felt something unsettling. They sensed many presences skittering across the surface below, odd life forms, unusual even for Kashyyyk. "Do you feel that as well, Masters? I've never sensed such strange beings before," Agent Kolar said, to which Kit Fisto said, "We should stay alert. Who knows what Yoda's been up to here. But one thing's for certain though, the Wookiees, I don't sense them." To which Obi-Wan said, "So the trillions of voices we sensed being silenced must have been the Wookiees." "Trillions, Master Kenobi? I thought it was billions," Mace Windu asked. Shocked, he nodded and asked Obi-Wan the following. "And how many billions are there in a trillion, Master Kenobi?" "At least 1,000,000, Obi-Wan said, leaning back into his chair. The Jedi vessel soon flew over Vartaki Sea, Shakti's bloodshot eyes closing as she concentrated. "I sense something down there," she said. "Something large, and it's looking at us." Obi-Wan seemed to feel it too. "The sooner we leave, the better," he said, glancing at Kit Fisto, who piloted them toward Yoda's coordinates. The ship flew closer, eventually reaching the hill Yoda had transmitted. From the cockpit, the Jedi could see the strange, organic ship, a grotesque, wishbone-shaped vessel that seemed molded from a combination of metal and bone. Mace opened the comlink again. "Master Yoda, we're above your position. Come outside. We can see your ship. We'll drop the cryofuel from up here. We'd rather not land." Hearing this, Anakin got up and asked R2 if it's safe to go out, to which R2 said that the cloud of death has cleared, and then also reminded Master Yoda that he did not tell the other Jedi about a possible airborne mutagen on the planet. "If the mutagen was still a problem, your Jedi friends would be dead," R2 beeped out. "Oh, forgotten about it, I had, R2. But worry we should not. Will of the Force, it was. Let's go retrieve the cryofuel," Yoda said, making his way towards the exit. Anakin sighed, and then along with R2 began following Master Yoda. Together, Yoda, Anakin, and R2 walked out of the alien vessel. Anakin looked up, shielding his eyes from the sunlight blazing down. Above, the Council's shuttle floated, its underbelly looming like a vigilant predator. "We see you, Master Yoda," Mace called down, voice amplified by the comm system of the shuttle. "We have the fuel you need." Anakin breathed a sigh of relief, feeling a knot unravel in his chest. R2 somehow let out an audible sigh-like whistle, and even Yoda's shoulders seemed to relax. From above, Kit Fisto, visible from the shuttle's open hatch, leaned over and spoke to Mace. "We just rolled the fuel tanks out from here, right?" Mace gave Kit an exasperated look before shrugging. "Yeah, why not? Just be careful with them. Those tanks are explosive after all. And Master Fisto, do keep an eye on Master Yoda, in case he tries something." He then turned, gesturing towards the other Jedi, who were further within the ship. "All right, let's begin. We'll roll the tanks down from here. Gently, with the Force, of course. Otherwise, they might explode. And we don't want that, do we?" Windu said, looking down at Yoda. The council members moved with deliberate care and began the process of rolling the 10 large cryofuel tanks to the edge of the shuttle's open hatch. One by one, they began lowering each tank down, guiding them with the Force to ensure they landed softly on the ground below. "We're going to need to have a very long chat about what happened here, Master Yoda." Obi-Wan's voice came through the comlink. Yes, Yoda dismissed, ears twitching in slight annoyance. "The Force works in mysterious ways, Obi-Wan. Whatever happened was the will of the Force." Anakin watched as the fuel tanks were carefully set down one by one. He shook his head and stepped away, needing a moment, some distance from the madness, from the sound of Yoda and Mace discussing the best way to handle the fuel tanks, and something about the Council being on the aroma of enlightenment again, whatever that meant. Anakin walked to the edge of the hill, looking off into the distance. The horizon stretched before him, the tangled, twisted forest of Kashyyyk below, eerily quiet now. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to center himself, to focus. But then something cut through the stillness. A feeling, an unsettling sensation. He sensed life, a flicker of something. No, more than that. He was sensing several life forms. His eyes snapped open, gaze darting toward the base of the hill. He could sense them getting closer, and they were fast, approaching the hill with incredible speed. Anakin's eyes kept scanning the base of the hill, trying to locate where exactly these creatures were coming from. And then he saw them. Anakin's breath caught, eyes widening in shock and horror at what he saw. 3 creatures surged up the hill, their sleek, elongated bodies dark as the deepest void, exoskeletons gleaming with an unnatural fusion of flesh and metallic sheen under the sunlight. Tubular structures jutted from their backs, intertwining with ridged armor plates that looked almost fused to sinewy muscle. They moved with terrifying grace, limbs, 8 of them, long and jointed, segmented with joints that seemed both organic and machine-like, their tails lashing behind them like whipcords. Their eyeless heads were smooth, bulbous, with ridges running back into long, serpentine, cranial structures. Their mouths resembled those of an arachnid with mandibles splayed outward. Their movements were fluid, yet disturbingly precise, insect-like in their speed and control, their limbs propelling them forward with a predatory, relentless power. Anakin could hear their hissing now. He felt fear envelop him, thick and consuming, years of Jedi teaching doing nothing to hinder the flood of terror as the creatures closed in. In his fear, he called upon the Force, and it answered like a flood. Screaming in sheer terror, Anakin unleashed a powerful Force push toward the 3 monstrous figures. The blast of energy surged forward, sending all 3 creatures flying back to the bottom of the hill. The one leading the charge was hit with such force that its skull shattered upon impact. Dull yellow fluid sprayed out like a pressurized fountain, which hissed and corroded the ground around it as it landed. Anakin watched in horror as the first creature crumpled to the ground, head shattered, corrosive blood sizzling against the soil. But then his heart sank further. The other 2 creatures, undeterred, began to rise. They resumed their climb, and to Anakin's growing dread, he saw many more creatures, dozens, pouring up from the base of the hill, their unnatural movements rapid and relentless. Anakin didn't hesitate. He dashed back to the ship, his footsteps rapid against the uneven ground. The others, both Yoda on the ground and the Council up above, already sensing his intense use of the Force, stood alert. They exchanged alarmed glances upon witnessing his distressed demeanor. "Drop those crushing tanks now!" Anakin shouted, looking up at the Council's ship that floated abow. Yoda stepped forward, confusion evident. "What troubles you, Skywalker?" "Mutated spiders, Master Yoda, they're coming. We need to leave, now," she said to the Grand Master. 6 fuel tanks were already unloaded, and he fixated on them. Letting out a determined cry, he reached out through the Force. Concentrating fiercely, he grasped the weight of the containers and, with considerable effort, levitated 4 into the ancient ship's opening. Turning to the remaining 2 tanks, Anakin lifted them swiftly, moving them into the ship as well, urgency driving his actions. R2-D2 emitted frantic whistles as he rolled into the ship, effectively conveying, "I'm not staying out here." Earlier calculations with R2 had revealed they needed at least 8 tanks for a hyperspace jump to the nearest system. Only 6 had been dropped. Anakin activated his comlink, specifically calling out to Obi-Wan. His voice was loud enough to carry to the Council ship above without it, but Anakin wanted to make sure his words were clear. "Obi-Wan, drop the rest. I'll catch them. Do this now." His words cut through the air with a command that left no room for hesitation. Above, the shuttle hovered just high enough to keep a safe distance, while still allowing the tanks to be dropped. Obi-Wan, alarmed by the plea, acted without delay. He pushed the last 4 tanks off the ramp, allowing them to descend. Extending their hands, Obi-Wan and Kit Fisto guided them gently with the Force, averting potential disaster. Below, Anakin harnessed the Force with all his might, catching the tanks and then immediately floating 2 of the tanks into the ship's gaping entrance, and for the briefest heartbeat, a sliver of relief washed over Anakin. But in that instant, his shoulders tensed and he glanced back over his shoulder at the Council's ship hovering behind him. The idea struck him suddenly, almost embarrassingly clear. He could just jump into the Council's ship above and escape this nightmare. How had he not thought of it earlier? Panic had clouded his mind, blinding him to the most obvious way out. But just as his muscles tensed, ready to turn and leap, a chill shot down his spine. He whipped back toward the entrance and froze. From the top of the alien ship, a monstrous, spider-like creature crawled into view, descending with a slow, calculated menace. It clung to the hull above the entrance he'd just used to float in the tanks. The creature stood still, like a dark, twisted guardian, its jagged limbs and alien exoskeleton glinting ominously in the light. Anakin ignited his lightsaber. Yoda felt a sudden wave of terror radiate from Anakin, snapping his attention toward the young Jedi. Following Anakin's gaze, he spotted the monstrous spider-like creature perched above the ship's entrance. "What is that, Skywalker?" he asked. No response came from Anakin. Just then, a deeper disturbance prickled at Yoda's senses. Dozens of entities, rapidly approaching from the base of the hill. Yoda turned to the edge of the hilltop. As a surge of movement caught his eye, the creatures began to crest the hill, heads popping into view, propelled by 8 angular limbs driving them forward with a chilling precision, their numbers multiplying by the second. Anakin, still fixed on the creature above, began to back slowly toward Yoda, his steps cautious, never taking his eyes off the monstrous arachnid. Suddenly, the creature above the ship entrance screamed, its grotesque mandibles splaying wide open, revealing an inner mouth that glinted metallic. It extended outwards, almost mechanical, and without a second thought, it launched itself at Anakin. Drawing deeply on the Force, Anakin transformed his fear into raw power. He vaulted into the air, twisting mid-leap, and as the beast missed its mark, he landed behind it. With a swift motion, he severed its tail. Continuing his assault, he struck again, slicing through its torso and causing it to collapse in two. A corrosive yellow fluid sprayed from the creature's remains, filling the air with a noxious odor. The fluid never touched Anakin, as he had created a force barrier around himself. But unnoticed by the Jedi Knight, some of the corrosive substance did fall on one of the 2 fuel tanks that still lay on the ground, close to where Anakin was now standing. But luckily, Master Yoda did notice. "Skywalker, move away!" Yoda shouted, his voice uncharacteristically sharp due to the mist of life. He extended his hand, forcefully pulling the compromised tank away from Anakin. With decisive intent, he hurled it toward the advancing creatures on the hillside. The tank soared before colliding with the leading beast, erupting in a massive explosion. Flames engulfed several abominations instantly. From above, the Jedi Council observed the fiery scene from their shuttle. Master Kolar stepped back from the viewport, concern evident. "We've delivered the fuel and our ship is intact. We must depart immediately. This might be Yoda's trap." Kit Fisto agreed, swiftly securing the ramp. As the door sealed, an unsettling sensation washed over them. A disturbance in the Force, signaling imminent danger. Mace Windu addressed the group gravely. "Something approaches," he warned. A sudden impact jolted the vessel, causing it to tremble. The Jedi exchanged wary glances, hands moving to their lightsabers. "What just happened?" Obi-Wan asked, alert and focused. "An entity, dangerous and fast. It's on the ship," Shaak Ti responded. On the ship's exterior, a shadow moved with uncanny speed and precision, its 8 limbs gripping the metal hull effortlessly. The creature maneuvered with lethal grace, positioning itself atop the shuttle's nose, directly above the cockpit. Illuminated by the sunlight, the creature revealed itself as a terrifying fusion of spider and machine. Metallic mandibles protruded from its face, sinister and sharp. Without warning, an inner jaw lined with needle-like teeth shot forward, smashing into the transparent steel windshield and causing cracks to spiderweb across its surface. Kit Fisto recoiled. What in the Force is that? No one responded, their attention affixed on the nightmare before them. After attempting to obliterate the transparent steel with its inner jaw and failing, the creature paused. Realizing the windshield was sturdier than expected, it shifted tactics, unleashing brutal, relentless headbutts. Each impact was more forceful than the last, the cracks expanding with alarming speed. Shaak Ti growled and violently shook her head, clearly most affected by the aroma of enlightenment. She then activated her weapon. "We can't just stand here and let it destroy us. Activate your Griffing sabers," she roared, throwing the entire council into action. Mace considered a force push to fling the creature away, but hesitated. Any hit strong enough to knock it back would likely rip off the cockpit shield entirely, inviting even more of these nightmares inside. His mind raced for a solution, but before he could act, a resounding crack shattered the tension. The windshield gave way. The creature exploded through the fractured barrier, landing heavily inside the cockpit. A guttural hiss escaped its mandibles. Reacting swiftly, the Jedi combined their powers, unleashing a forceful telekinetic blast. The creature was hurled backward into the control panel, sparks erupting as the ship lurched from the impact. The abrupt movement threw everyone off balance. Regaining its footing, the mutant spider lunged at Shak-Ti, its inner jaw aiming directly at her. The sudden lurch of the ship had knocked her lightsaber from her grip, sending it skidding just out of reach. She could only watch it slide away as the creature closed in. Acting on instinct, she caught the vicious appendage with her hands. Channeling the Force, she transformed her anger into formidable strength, holding the creature at bay. The creature's tail writhed, stinger poised to strike. But before it could deliver the fatal blow, Mace Windu and Obi-Wan regained their stance and propelled it away with a combined force push. It crashed into the control panel once more. Seizing the moment, Shak-Ti hurled her lightsaber at the beast. The creature, momentarily disoriented and rearing on its hind legs, exposed its gaping maw. The spinning blade sliced through the air, embedding itself deep within the monster's throat. Maintaining her focus, Shak-Ti used the Force to hold the creature upright as her lightsaber carved downward, splitting it open. Corrosive acid sprayed from the wound, the yellow fluid hissing upon contact with the surroundings. The creature shuddered violently before collapsing as she recalled her saber to her hand. They defeated the creature, but their respite was brief. Acidic blood now pooled on the cockpit floor, eating away at the metal with alarming speed. The hull beneath the creature gave way, creating a jagged hole, through which the remains of the creature slipped out. Gritting his teeth, Mace called out, "We need to get off the ship now. We'll use Yoda's cursed ship to get out of here." The Council then guided their failing ship towards the ground, landing it in a barely controlled crash, not far from Yoda and Anakin. As the Council disembarked from the ruined ship, they were greeted by a scene of chaos. Yoda and Anakin were engaged in a fierce battle at the entrance of Yoda's organic vessel, their lightsabers blazing as they unleashed powerful force pushes, scattering the monstrous mutated spiders that swarmed around them. Anakin's face was twisted in a mix of terror and he was screaming. His entire body braced as he sent another wave of force energy crashing into the creatures, their skeletal forms tumbling back down the hill. Yet, for every monstrosity they repelled, two more seemed to take its place. The creatures soon turned their attention toward the newly arrived masters. Sensing the imminent threat, Mace Windu yelled, "Form up, shield yourselves." In a synchronized motion, the 6 masters raised their hands, conjuring a shimmering force barrier that enveloped them in a protective dome. The mutated spiders crashed against the invisible wall, their acidic saliva sizzling as it splattered harmlessly against the barrier. "Make for the ship," Obi-Wan shouted, his voice cutting through the cacophony of hisses and screeches. With the barrier holding, the Masters began moving toward Yoda and Anakin's position. As they advanced, they noticed that Yoda and Anakin were now standing back to back, a smaller force bubble encasing them. The relentless assault of the creatures had prevented them from reaching the ship's entrance. The acid blood of the beast also made engaging with lightsabers too dangerous, leaving force pushes as their only means of defense. Closing the gap with Anakin and Yoda, the Council members picked up their pace, their own barrier merging seamlessly with that of Yoda and Anakin's. The combined field expanded, its luminous glow intensifying as it pushed the encroaching horrors further back. "To the entrance we must go," Yoda exclaimed. United, the Jedi moved as one toward the ship's entrance. The creatures battered against the barrier with renewed ferocity, their inner jaws snapping, acidic drool searing the ground where it fell. Some of the beasts were larger than the rest, towering figures with dark, shiny exoskeletons, leaping with terrifying agility to slam against the protective dome. One by one, the Jedi slipped into the ship. Mace Windu and Obi-Wan held the rear, their focus unbroken as they maintained the barrier. "Saci, hurry," Mace urged. Saci nodded, retreating carefully into the vessel. As he crossed the threshold, Mace and Obi-Wan followed suit, the barrier flickering but holding just long enough for Yoda to leap inside. Without wasting a moment, Yoda reached for the control panel beside the entrance. His fingers pressed down on one of the buttons, and the massive door began to slide shut with a resonant thud, sealing them inside. Anakin activated his comlink. "R2, did any of those things get in?" he asked, his breath ragged. R2-D2's electronic chirp came through, sounding surprisingly nonchalant. "Negative, Anakin. They seem to have little interest in this creepy ship," the droid said. Mace Windu turned to Yoda, his expression stern. "Master Yoda, get this thing into the air." Yoda shook his head. "First, we must refuel. To the hyperdrive chamber, we must go." The fuel tanks were gathered near the entrance where Anakin had placed them with the Force. Each of the 7 masters and Anakin used the Force to lift a tank, the heavy containers floating effortlessly beside them as they followed Yoda deeper into the ship. The corridor led them to a chamber that contrasted the organic design of the rest of the vessel, a room housing a surprisingly conventional fuel loading station. Working quickly, they secured the tanks into the designated slots. Anakin tapped his comlink again. R2, we've loaded the fuel. How's it looking? R2-D2's response was less than reassuring. Well, considering this ship's software is about as reliable as a Java's promise, it still reads full. But that could mean anything. Yoda dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. Into space first, we must get. Worry about readings later, we will. They rushed toward the control chamber, the labyrinthine passages of the ship twisting around them. As they ran, R2-D2's voice crackled over the comlink. Anakin, we've got a problem. The creatures have swarmed the ship. They're crawling all over it, trying to find a way in. The Jedi could feel it. A multitude of dark presences skittering across the vessel's surface, their claws scraping against the hull. Are we secure? Obi-Wan asked, his tone urgent. According to the completely unreliable ship software, we should be safe from intruders, R2 replied. As the ship's engines roared to life, it lifted off from the hilltop. Bursting into the control chamber, the Jedi gathered around the central hologram. The display showed distorted images of the sky outside, marred by the dark forms of mutated spiders clinging to the ship's exterior visual receptors. What are we going to do about them? Obi-Wan questioned. Concern etched on his face. Yoda's eyes remained fixed on the hologram. Once in space, they will die. Hopefully, he replied, though his tone lacked confidence. The ship soared over the Wawat archipelago, the dense forest giving way to the vast expanse of the Wartaki Sea. As they passed over the shimmering waters, Shakti sensed something again. I sense it again, she whispered. The presence from before, watching us from below. Yoda looked at her and asked, Sense something in the water, do you, Master T? She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the hologram. Yes, when we first arrived on Kashyyyk, I felt eyes upon us from beneath the water. It's stronger now, much closer. R2, can you get us a visual below? Anakin asked urgently. On it, R2 beeped. Manipulating the ship's controls, R2-D2 redirected the external sensors to focus on the sea beneath them. The hologram shifted, revealing a murky view of the Wartaki Sea's depths. At first, there was nothing but darkness, the water seeming endless and empty. Then a colossal silhouette began to materialize, a massive creature lurking just beneath the surface. There, what the criff is that? Shakti exclaimed, her eyes widening as she pointed at the hologram. Before anyone could respond, Anakin shouted, R2, get us out of here. Faster. R2-D2 swiveled his dome to face Anakin, his lights flickering indignantly. Oh, brilliant idea, Anakin. Speed up. Why didn't I think of that? The droid chirped. Then, as they all stared at the hologram, water beneath them erupted when a massive creature breached the surface. A nightmarish, fish-like entity, its sheer size rivaling that of their ship. Its elongated serpentine body was covered in sleek obsidian scales that shimmered with an unnatural sheen. Biomechanical ridges lined its spine, pulsating with an eerie, faint luminescence. The creature's head was monstrous, a cavernous maw lined with multiple rows of razor-sharp teeth, each one the size of a humanoid arm. From within its gaping mouth, an inner jaw snapped forward. Its eyeless face was framed by frilled gills, and its massive fins stretched outward like dark wings. As the Leviathan soared toward the ship, the Jedi watched in horrified awe. By the Force, Obi-Wan whispered, his face pale. Just when collision seemed inevitable, the sea's surface exploded once more. From the side, an even larger entity surged upward, a colossal octopus-like creature with sprawling tentacles. The mutated octopus lashed out, wrapping its massive tentacles around the leaping fish. The tentacles coiled tightly, halting the fish's ascent mere meters from the ship. The two behemoths thrashed violently as they fell back into the sea, the octopus's grip unyielding as it began to drag the mutated fish downward. The fish writhed, its inner jaws snapping futilely. The octopus tightened its hold and began to swallow the fish, head first. The fish's exoskeleton cracked under the immense pressure, releasing spurts of acidic blood that hissed and steamed upon contact with the octopus. Undeterred, the octopus continued its grim task, dragging its prey beneath the waves. As the tumult subsided, Obi-Wan exhaled slowly. There's always a bigger fish, he remarked, attempting a wry smile. The ship shuddered as it ascended rapidly through Kashyyyk's atmosphere. The mutated spiders clinging to the hull showed no signs of letting go. The increasing altitude and thinning air did little to deter them. As they breached the atmosphere, the darkness of space enveloped them. The stars stretched out in a glittering tapestry, but the Jedi had little time to admire the view. On the holographic display, the mutated spiders began to stir. Exposed to the vacuum of space, they reacted not by dying but by adapting. They started secreting a resinous substance, enveloping themselves in cocoon-like shells that clung stubbornly to the hull. Anakin observed the hologram. They won't stay attached if we jump to hyperspace, he suggested, his tone edged with urgency. Yoda nodded. Worth a try it is. R2, Prepare for hyperspace jump to the Ilum system, he commanded, choosing a remote Jedi sanctuary known for its secrecy. R2-D2 swiveled his dome and beeped affirmatively. Coordinates set, initiating hyperspace jump in 10 seconds, the astromech droid announced. The stars outside stretched into streaks of light as they made the jump to hyperspace. The sudden acceleration shook the vessel, and on the holographic display, they watched as the resinous cocoons peel away from the hull, disappearing into the void. Once they were safely in hyperspace, R2 reported, "All foreign objects have been detached from the hull. We are clear." Relief washed over the group. Anakin exhaled deeply and collapsed onto the floor of the control room, exhaustion overtaking him. "Finally," he murmured, staring blankly at the ceiling. Cecitine looked at Yoda and said, "Master Yoda, we need to understand what just happened back there. How did those creatures come to be?" Yoda hesitated, his eyes shifting. "Find vases filled with motor oil on the ship, I did. Decided to dispose of them into the Wartaki Sea to prompt an environmental investigation, I did. To delay the war efforts on Kashyyyk. Trying to save the Wookiees, I was, but destroy the planet the motor oil did. My fault it was not." "Master Yoda, that doesn't make sense. Motor oil is not known to cause such catastrophic mutations," Mace said, although his voice lacked conviction. Obi-Wan folded his arms. "We need the truth, Master." Yoda sighed, realizing his fabrication wasn't convincing. Before he could respond, Shaak Ti's eyes focused as she noticed something in Yoda's pocket. With a swift motion, she used the Force to pull the small inhaler into her hand. "The mist of life?" she questioned sharply. "We warned you about using this criffing thing again, Master Yoda." Yoda reached out.
"Return it you must, Master Shaak Ti. Mine it is. Needed for health reasons, I do."
Ignoring Yoda's protest, Shaak Ti gave the inhaler 8 rapid pumps and took a deep breath. "Ah, that's the stuff," she said. A slight grin forming on her lips as her eyes glazed over momentarily. A distant, almost euphoric look settling in. Yoda scowled, ears twitching in agitation. He waved a hand in her direction, his voice filled with pseudo-intellectual indignation. "On the aroma of enlightenment, all of you already are. Greedy you are, Shaak Ti. Greed. A shadow of the dark side it is." He wagged a finger at her as if reprimanding a youngling caught sneaking extra ration packs. Before Shaak Ti could retort, R2-D2's dome spun to Yoda, and his lights flickered in annoyance. The shadow of the dark side does not sound as bad as the shadow that engulfed Kashyyyk and killed everything. What was that, a shadow of Master Yoda? R2's beeps carried an unmistakable sarcastic edge. "A shadow of your mother, that was," Yoda said. The words came out in a low growl, his tiny form trembling slightly as he seethed. R2 stayed silent for a long, dramatic moment. Then, finally, the astromech let out a flurry of beeps. "Apologies for the delayed response, Master Yoda," R2 said mockingly. "I was busy rendering an image of my scomplink to send to thine own mother." "Enough," Mace Windu said, clearly tired at the nonsense he was seeing. He took a deep breath, visibly trying to regain his composure. He turned to Anakin, who was lying on the floor, staring blankly at the ceiling, his face pale, his eyes distant, as if caught in a nightmare he couldn't escape. "Skywalker, what happened here?" Anakin barely moved, his voice almost a whisper, as if every word was a burden. "Master Yoda decided to dump a mutagen he found on this ship into the Wartaki Sea. He thought it would accuse the separatists of using bioweapons, prompt an independent investigation, stall the conflict here, and stop him from needing to come to Kashyyyk. But it went wrong. The mutagen didn't just sink into the sea. It spread, multiplied, killed everything, mutated what it didn't kill." His eyes remained fixed on the ceiling, almost catatonic. The council members all turned to Yoda, their faces stricken with shock, and a touch of anger at the sheer foolishness of the plan. Mace spoke first. "Master Yoda, you could have just broken your leg or something. That would have been excuse enough to avoid coming here. What the hell were you thinking?" Obi-Wan gave Anakin a sideways glance. "And you, Anakin, how could you allow this to happen?" Anakin looked up, meeting Obi-Wan's eyes with a hollow stare. "Master Yoda outranks me, Obi-Wan. As a Jedi Knight, I can't question the actions of a Grandmaster. Had I the rank of Master, I would have objected. But since the Council denied me that, there was nothing I could do." No one responded to this, and Anakin went back to staring into the ceiling. Meanwhile, Yoda tried to gather himself. He cleared his throat, his voice suddenly taking on a philosophical tone.
"Rejoice in death we should. It is the will of the Force, Balance it brings."
The room fell into silence before Obi-Wan's voice cut through, dripping with incredulity. "We oughta slap the criff out of you, Master Yoda. You killed an entire planet with your criffing motor oil. Mace Windu's lips pressed into a tight line as he thought it over. The significance of what had happened was undeniable, the consequences unimaginable. He too wanted nothing more than to slap the criff out of Yoda and haul him before the Republic courts. But he knew the fallout that would follow such an action. The entire Jedi Order would come under intense scrutiny. All their extracurricular activities would be dragged into the light. No more mind expansion, no more aroma enlightenment. They couldn't have that. "Everyone, focus," Mace called out, commanding their attention as he sat on the chair in front of the control panel. "We can't pin this on Yoda without taking ourselves down with him. The Republic would bury us under a pile of legal problems, so deep we'd never dig ourselves out. No, we need a scapegoat, someone we can frame for this mess." The other Jedi all turned to Mace, their expressions a mix of exhaustion, resignation, and the lingering effects of the aroma of enlightenment. Anakin still lay on the floor, staring blankly at the ceiling, while Shaak Ti paced violently back and forth, her hands twitching, her eyes wild as she punched at the air, her body overtaken by the effects of the mist of life. Obi-Wan was the first to speak, his voice tentative. "We could blame the Separatists, say it was some sort of bioweapon attack." Mace shook his head. "The Republic ship we used to get here is still on Kashyyyk. An investigation could prove we were involved. That ship might not have Jedi markers, but it won't hold up under real scrutiny." Yoda raised a hand, his eyes closing for a moment before speaking in his typically serene way. "Blame young Palpatine we must. The Chancellor, always hating the Jedi he has been." His eyes opened, glinting with a dark resolve. "With him gone, the Jedi will be the supreme authority. Without the Chancellor's interference, victory in this war, or peace negotiations we could have, then freely seek enlightenment again, we can." Anakin's head turned, his expression twisted in disbelief as he processed Yoda's words. But before he could protest, Yoda fixed his eyes on him. "A necessary sacrifice it is, Master Skywalker. Grant you the rank of Master, I do." Yoda's voice was almost hypnotic, his words dripping with temptation. Anakin hesitated, the struggle clear in his eyes. Then slowly his gaze shifted back to the ceiling, his shoulders sagging in defeat. "Fine," he murmured, the fight leaving him. He no longer cared for Palpatine. Padme mattered more. Also, a quick side note, in this timeline, Anakin left Coruscant before Palpatine could tell him about Darth Plagueis. So, at this point, he has no reason to think that Palpatine could help him with Padme. The archives remain his only hope. With the decision made and the specifics of their plan to pin this on Palpatine worked out, Yoda stepped up onto the control panel. He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice carrying a weighty, solemn tone. "A few words, I will say. For the Wookiees who died," Yoda began, with the other Jedi looking very annoyed. "Farewell, my friends. May your spirits find peace. Apologize on behalf of Faye Coven, I do. Her mistake killed you. It did." He paused dramatically, his eyes closing in reverence. "Goodbye, Tarful. Goodbye, Chewbacca. Miss you, I will." The brief silence that followed was broken by Shaak Ti's snort of laughter. She swayed, a manic grin spreading across her face as she mimicked Yoda, her voice rising and falling in a mocking parody.
"Goodbye, Tarful. Goodbye, Chewbacca. Miss you, I will."
She burst into hysterical laughter, her hands latching onto Obi-Wan's shoulders as she shook him violently.
"The best suppliers you were. The criffing best," Shaak Ti said. So, quick side note, in this timeline, Tarful and Chewbacca were indeed supplying Master Yoda with certain items. And the reason why Yoda has bad relations with the Wookiees here is because Yoda, while he was happy to accept these substances from Tarful and Chewbacca, he had a difficult time paying them on time. And in the very last dealing he had with these two Wookiees, Yoda used a Jedi mind trick to convince them that the bag of rocks he handed over were in fact Republic credits. "Rocks will do fine," Yoda had said to the Wookiees. So that is why he has bad relations with the Wookiees. And now back to the story. Shaak Ti's face twisted with amusement as she fumbled for the inhaler again, pumping it once more, and taking a deep hit. Yoda's face twisted in rage. He grabbed his gnarled walking stick and hurled it at her. "Enough, enough, you disrespectful child." Shaak Ti dodged, still cackling, while Obi-Wan looked about 1,000 years done with the whole thing, barely holding on to his Jedi composure as he steadied her. Before anyone could say anything else, R2-D2's dome swiveled, his lights blinking furiously. "I swear to the machine god, I will crash this ship if you don't all calm the criff down," the droid beeped. They soon carried out their plan. The ship continued to Ilum, where, with R2-D2's help, they meticulously wiped all evidence of Jedi presence from the creepy ship. The droid set the alien vessel to autopilot,
programming it on a long route to Coruscant, specifically the hangar reserved for Palpatine. The Jedi then boarded another ship, one cloaked and designed for stealth, returning to Coruscant just as secretly as they had left. Less than a day had passed by this point since the whole ordeal began, and news of the calamity on Kashyyyk was just beginning to spread. There were of course satellites around Kashyyyk. They had captured the strange event, an ominous cloud engulfing the planet, and the footage had been transmitted across the galaxy. However, no one cared about Kashyyyk, and most ignored the transmission and thought it was some kind of strange rain. This is why no one showed up at Kashyyyk right after the incident. But now, after the Jedi had returned, many had begun suspecting that something odd had happened on Kashyyyk. Back at the Jedi Temple, Anakin went straight to the archives, intent on finding a way to save Padme. Meanwhile, Yoda and the rest of the council returned to their serene council chamber, masking their unease and acting as natural as possible. When news reports began detailing the strange destruction on Kashyyyk, they too pretended to be surprised, feigning confusion and concern. Soon enough, roughly a standard day after the Jedi had returned to the temple, the alien ship, guided by R2-D2's route, arrived at Palpatine's personal hangar. The Jedi, already poised to investigate, quickly stepped in. The story unfolded precisely as planned. They found that the ship had left Coruscant, journeyed to Kashyyyk, and returned, its timeline aligning perfectly with the tragedy of the Wookiees. In a solemn public address before the Senate, Yoda presented what the Jedi had discovered: a series of vases containing a dark, viscous, mutagenic substance recovered from the ship. Side note, there were other chambers on that ship with more vases, although in far smaller numbers, but enough for the Jedi's purposes here. Yoda demonstrated the mutagen's effects to the Senate by pouring a small amount onto a worm, which grotesquely mutated into a larger, monstrous form, and it was known by this point from orbital observations that Kashyyyk had become a mutated hellhole. The evidence seemed clear. The Chancellor had used this ship to deploy a bioweapon on Kashyyyk, possibly to frame the Separatists and gain political leverage. But the galaxy found the Jedi's case against Palpatine even more compelling after a holovid surfaced from Mas Amedda, which was posted online just hours after he was found dead from a blaster wound in his office. In the holovid, Amedda claimed that Palpatine had forced him to use the alien ship to devastate Kashyyyk, framing the act as a Separatist bioweapon attack to erode support for the Separatists and ensure an easier Republic victory. Amedda explained that he fully expected Palpatine would kill him once the mission was complete, to erase all evidence, so he had set the holovid to post automatically if his heart stopped. Amedda went on to explain how he had secretly programmed the ship to return to Coruscant, specifically to Palpatine's private hangar, ensuring that an investigation would eventually lead back to the Chancellor. "I know this confession comes too late to save the Wookiees," he said in the holovid, "but perhaps it's not too late to stop Palpatine." The recording caused immediate controversy in the Senate. Some questioned its authenticity, pointing to Amedda's seemingly dazed demeanor throughout the confession. However, when consulted, the Jedi Council vouched for the recording's legitimacy. Master Yoda himself stood before the Senate, declaring that they had sensed no deception in Amedda's final testimony. "A hero's death, Vice Chair, Amedda suffered," Yoda proclaimed solemnly. "His sacrifice, instrumental in bringing a great darkness to light, it was." The combination of Amedda's death, his confession, and the Jedi Council's endorsement proved devastating to what remained of Palpatine's reputation. The holofeed broadcasted this revelation to trillions. Many citizens praised Chancellor Palpatine for destroying Kashyyyk. However, legally, the pressure was insurmountable. Yoda issued a formal statement asserting that the Jedi had sensed the dark side surrounding Palpatine as well. With mounting evidence, the Security Council declared Palpatine a threat and activated Order 65, officially removing him from office, with the clones moving to arrest him. The Jedi watched his arrest unfold live through the clone body cams. They did so with their political allies, in the office of Bail Organa to be specific. As they watched, bodycam feed shifted to the red-carpeted entrance of the Chancellor's office. A squad of clone troopers approached the doorway, the leader issuing curt commands. The Jedi had executed their plan with precision. Everything was falling into place. Yet, as they watched the clones enter Palpatine's office, the Council felt an underlying disquiet. Palpatine had always been shrewd, slippery. There was no telling how he would respond. Shortly prior to this, Palpatine, who had been watching the Security Council speak in the Senate from his office, saw them execute Order 65. He had considered executing Order 66, but with no evidence of treason against the Jedi, and with the Jedi accusing him of destroying Kashyyyk, activating Order 66 would have just made him look treasonous. and would also be pointless as the Senate or the Security Council could halt the order and issue Order 65 against him anyway. He was caught in a trap of his own making, unable to act without dire consequences. Palpatine believed that the Jedi must have discovered his true nature somehow, and that this entire scenario, the destruction of Kashyyyk, and the subsequent framing of him, was their doing to rid the galaxy of him. He had underestimated just how far the Jedi were willing to go, what evil measures they would employ to end the Sith. Even he had not considered wiping out an entire world as a tactic. On the holodisplays in his office, Palpatine watched the troopers approach the entrance to his office. And soon, the door to his office hissed open, and the clones walked in with blasters pointed at him. "Chancellor Palpatine, you are under arrest by order of the Security Council," the lead clone announced, his voice steady despite the tension. Palpatine slowly rose, his eyes scanning the room. His expression shifted, not to fear or anger, but to something darker, a realization. With growing bitterness, Darth Sidious realized that the dark side seemed to favor the Jedi over him in this moment, a betrayal that stung more deeply than he could have anticipated. The lead clone stepped forward, a pair of cuffs in his gloved hands. Palpatine's eyes flickered, the yellow of the dark side flashing briefly, a hateful smirk forming on his lips. There was no more room for pretense, no more need to hide. He had played his role for years, manipulating the Republic and the Jedi from the shadows. But now, cornered, he would show them the true power of the Sith. With a fluid motion, his arm shot under his desk, and a crimson blade ignited with a snap hiss. The clones, initially taken aback, barely had time to react before Palpatine lunged, his lightsaber cleaving through the air with a lethal hum. He moved with the speed of a coiled snake, dispatching the nearest clone before any of them could raise their blasters. The other clones scrambled, shouts echoing through the office. In Bail Organa's office in the executive building, the entire council watched in stunned silence through the clone body cams as Palpatine's true nature was laid bare before them. The realization that the Chancellor was not just a political manipulator, but the very Sith Lord they had been searching for, the shadow that had clouded everything, struck them hard, yet they couldn't afford to show any reaction. They had already told everyone they sensed the dark side in Palpatine. To act surprised now would make people doubt the Jedi. They had to keep their composure, even as their collective shock reverberated through the Force. Yoda's eyes, wide with disbelief for a brief moment, slowly narrowed. He turned his head ever so slightly towards Mace Windu, his gaze meeting Mace's for just a second, as if silently saying,
"What the criff?"
Palpatine made quick work of the clones, each swing of his crimson blade precise, deadly, fueled by years of pent-up rage. But as the last clone fell, the office door burst open, and more troopers flooded in. Palpatine hissed, his twisted visage contorted with hatred, but even he knew that sheer numbers would eventually overwhelm him. He had one chance. He turned and, without a moment's hesitation, sprinted towards the massive window at the far end of his office. With a guttural snarl, he crashed through the transparent steel, shards scattering in all directions. The clones rushed to the shattered window, peering out as Palpatine plummeted, his robes billowing around him like the wings of some demonic creature. Far below, Coruscant's endless layers of traffic zoomed by in chaotic streams. Palpatine twisted in the air, the Force guiding him towards the hangar below. But as he aimed for it, a speeder veered off its lane and barreled into him. On top of the speeder, two figures grappled, both clad in sleek suits, locked in a deadly struggle for a briefcase. Palpatine's Sith instincts sharpened his focus, and he dodged that speeder only to be hit by another speeder that had also veered off course, likely following the first one. Palpatine only had time to make out a cybernetic arm that piloted the craft before the speeder hit him. With a crunch, Palpatine crashed directly into the windshield of the speeder, his body crumpling on impact. The pilot of the speeder used the distraction to kick the person next to them out the speeder and continued chasing the other speeder. And Palpatine, now little more than a crimson smear, slid lifelessly from the vehicle's hood and disappeared into the endless abyss below. Back in Bail Organa's office in the executive building, the council members exchanged stunned glances. It was over. The Sith Lord, Darth Sidious, was gone. Not defeated in some grand duel, but in a chaotic, almost absurd twist of fate. Obi-Wan glanced at the others and muttered with a sardonic smile, "Well, looks like the revenge of the Sith won't be happening." With Palpatine gone, peace slowly began to return. Padme did not die, and with the Sith threat extinguished, the Jedi Council returned to indulging in their various aromas, now unrestricted. The Separatists, with no real leadership left, were left with no choice but to negotiate for peace. And Newt Gunray, desperate to save his own skin, had General Grievous assassinated by gifting him an exploding lightsaber that blew his body to pieces. This led to peace negotiations, and the war ended without further bloodshed. By the end of it all, Bail Organa was appointed the new Chancellor, and Anakin and Padme departed to Naboo to relax, smoking Naboo leaf together, free from the chaos. Around this time, the Jedi Council decided to record a holovid addressing the tragedy of the Wookiees. However, the process took far longer than expected, mostly because they had the Lumen Crucible turned up to its maximum setting. Yoda tried to speak solemnly.
Killed not by droids, the Wookiees were.
But the council members couldn't keep a straight face. Kit Fisto, in particular, kept mimicking Yoda's voice, his exaggerated gestures sending the others rolling on the floor in fits of laughter while they breathed in the aroma of ascension, a stronger variant of the aroma of enlightenment. Master Shaak Ti, already passed out in the corner, wasn't part of the chaos, which only made things worse for Master Yoda. Yoda, growing increasingly frustrated, finally snapped and hurled his stick across the room.
Do this griffing nonsense someone else can,
he shouted. At that point, Ki-Adi-Mundi walked into the council chamber, his expression stern as he took in the scene. Show some respect for the dead, he scolded them, his voice echoing in the chamber. He stepped up to where Yoda had been standing, took a deep breath, and faced the holocam. He paused for a moment, then with a completely straight face said, "What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?" There was a beat of silence before he burst into manic laughter, joined almost immediately by the rest of the council. And so peace returned, and the Jedi Council lived happily ever after. The end.